For nearly 2 centuries, the Knights Templar stood as the most disciplined and feared warrior monks in Christendom. They were born from holy necessity, rose through faith and steel, and fell not on the battlefield, but in courtrooms, prisons, and fires, lit by men who once called them brothers. Their destruction remains one of the most unsettling ironies of medieval history. An order created by the Church, empowered by the Church, and ultimately destroyed by the Church itself. The story of the Templars begins in the aftermath of the First Crusade. In 1099, Jerusalem fell to Christian forces, but the victory created a new problem. Thousands of pilgrims now travelled dangerous roads across the Holy Land, vulnerable to bandits and warlords. Around 1119, a small group of knights led by Hugues de Payens took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, dedicating themselves to protecting these pilgrims. They were granted quarters near the Temple of Solomon, hence the name Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. At first the Templars were poor in every sense. They owned little, wore simple white mantles, and lived almost as ascetics. Their transformation began when the Church embraced them. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes, the order received official recognition, strongly supported by Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most powerful religious voices of the age. Bernard reframed violence itself. Killing in defence of Christendom was no longer sin, but sacred duty. With papal blessing, the Templars became something unprecedented, professional soldiers bound by monastic discipline. What followed was an extraordinary rise. Papal bulls granted the Templars sweeping privileges, exemption from local laws, freedom from taxes, and direct obedience only to the Pope. Donations poured in from kings, nobles, and widows seeking salvation through patronage. The order spread across Europe and the Levant, building castles, commanderies, and fortresses. Their military effectiveness became legendary, particularly their disciplined heavy cavalry charges, which could turn the tide of battle. Yet their greatest power was not on the battlefield. Over time, the Templars developed a sophisticated financial system. Pilgrims could deposit money in Europe and withdraw it in the Holy Land using coded letters, an early form of international banking. Kings entrusted them with treasuries, loans, and state finances. By the late 13th century, the Templars were not only warriors of God, they were creditors of monarchs. This power came at a cost. As the Crusader states collapsed, Acre fell in 1291, the original mission of the Templars effectively ended. They retreated to Europe, wealthy, militarized, and without a clear purpose. In a changing political landscape, this made them dangerous. No man felt this more keenly than King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair. Philip was deeply in debt to the Templars, chronically short of money, and determined to centralize royal authority. He had already clashed with the papacy and understood that spiritual legitimacy could be manipulated. The Templars, with their secrecy, wealth, and independence, were the perfect target. Rumours had circulated for years, whispers of secret rituals, strange initiations, and unorthodox beliefs. Philip transformed rumour into weapon. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, in a coordinated operation across France, Templars were arrested en masse. The charges were shocking: heresy, blasphemy, idol worship, spitting on the cross, and immoral rites. Under torture, many confessed, confessions that would later be retracted, ignored, or silenced. Philip pressured Pope Clement V, a politically weak pontiff dependent on French support, to act. Here lies the heart of the tragedy. The Church did not initially condemn the Templars. Clement V hesitated, ordered investigations, and even absolved the order's leaders in private. But public pressure, royal intimidation, and fear of schism weighed heavily. In 1312, at the Council of Vienne, Clement officially dissolved the Knights Templar, not declaring them guilty, but suppressing the order for the good of the church. Their property was nominally transferred to the Hospitaller, but much was seized by the French crown. The leadership met a darker fate. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, withdrew his confession and proclaimed the order's innocence. In 1314 he was burned alive in Paris. According to legend, he called upon God to judge Pope and King within the year. Both were dead before it ended. The fall of the Templars was not simply the destruction of an order. It marked a turning point in medieval power. It demonstrated that kings could bend the church to their will, that financial power without political protection was fatal, and that faith could be weaponized against those who once defended it. The church did not merely fail to protect its warriors, it sacrificed them to preserve its fragile authority. In the centuries that followed, the Templars became myth. Legends of hidden treasure, secret survival, and forbidden knowledge replaced the quieter truth. They were victims of fear, greed, and institutional weakness. Their real legacy lies not in mystery, but in warning. Even the most sacred institutions are vulnerable when power outweighs principle. The Knights Templar did not fall because they lost faith, nor because they lost battles. They fell because they had outgrown the system that created them. And when the balance of power shifted, the church chose survival over loyalty. In the end, the swords of Christendom were broken, not by enemies of the cross, but by the hands that once blessed them. Close your eyes. Let the heavy curtain of the present world fall away. Let the noise of your day fade into the soft rhythmic breathing of the night. Imagine you are standing in a place where the air is thick with heat and the scent of dry, ancient stone. The sun is setting over the Judean hills, casting long violet shadows across the walls of Jerusalem. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Now step with me into the dust of the year 1119. The First Crusade is over, a memory 20 years old, yet the Holy Land remains a perilous fractured mosaic. Jerusalem belongs to the Christians, ruled by King Baldwin II, but the roads leading to its golden gates are anything but holy. They are gauntlets of fear. We find ourselves in the king's court, not amidst the splendour of gold and silk, but surrounded by the rough, pragmatic reality of a kingdom at war. Standing before the king are 9 men. They do not look like the pristine, shining knights of later storybooks. Their mail is rusted from the sea air of Jaffa. Their tunics are stained with the red dust of the road. Leading them is a nobleman from the Champagne region of France, Hugues de Payan. He is not young, and his eyes hold the weary look of a man who has seen too many pilgrims slaughtered for the coins in their purses. He speaks plainly to the king. The conquest was the easy part, he suggests. Keeping the faithful alive is the burden. Hugues proposes a radical idea, a brotherhood of knights who will not seek land or titles or spoils of war. Instead, they will take the monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, just like the monks secluded in European abbeys, but with one crucial, violent difference. They will wield the sword. Their monastery will be the saddle. Their cloister, the open road. King Baldwin, a practical man who lacks the manpower to police his bandit-ridden highways, agrees. He grants them a headquarters in the most prestigious, yet dilapidated sector of the city, the southern wing of the royal palace, built upon the ruins of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. To the Christians, this is the site of the ancient Temple of Solomon, and so they take their name, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. It is a humble, almost desperate beginning. Historians still debate whether there were truly only 9 of them for the first 9 years, or if this is a symbolic number representing perfection. But the reality of their poverty is undisputed. The early seal of the order depicts 2 knights riding a single horse, a symbol of brotherhood and humility, though one suspects it was also a logistical nightmare for the horse, given the weight of 2 grown men in chainmail. It's the medieval equivalent of carpooling to work, but with significantly more metal involved. In these early days, they are more scavengers than lords. They wear cast-off clothes donated by the faithful. They patrol the road from Jaffa to Jerusalem, a winding, treacherous path where bandits hide in the limestone caves waiting for unarmed pilgrims. The knights are few, but their presence begins to change the atmosphere of the Levant. They are a strange sight. Lethal warriors who pray the hours, men who kill with efficiency but eat in silence. As night falls over our first chapter, imagine them in their new quarters on the Temple Mount. It is not a palace yet, it is a ruin. They sleep in the stables, surrounded by the ghosts of Solomon's empire, listening to the wind howl through the stone arches. They have no way of knowing that beneath their feet, in the dark, hollowed-out chambers of the Mount, lie secrets that will one day fuel legends of the Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant. For now, they are just 9 men in the dark, polishing their swords by candlelight, unaware that they have just lit a fire that will burn for 200 years. We leave the sun-baked stones of Jerusalem now, travelling northwest across the churning blue of the Mediterranean, over the Alps, and into the deep, verdant heart of France. The year moves forward to 1128, and the air here is different, cool, damp, and smelling of pine needles and damp earth. We find ourselves in the region of Champagne, a land of rolling vineyards and dark forests, where the feudal world is waking up to a new reality. Hugues de Payen has returned home. He has left his small band of brothers guarding the dangerous roads of the Levant to undertake a mission perhaps more perilous than fighting bandits. He must navigate the politics of the church. He travels not as a conqueror, but as a beggar knight, moving from court to court, telling the story of the Holy Land, of the pilgrims' suffering, and of the 9 men standing alone against the dark. But Hugues knows that stories alone will not feed horses or repair armour. He needs authority. He needs a voice that can thunder from the pulpit and reach the soul of Christendom. He needs Bernard. To understand the explosion of the Templar Order, one must understand Bernard of Clairvaux. Picture a man who is the exact opposite of a warrior. He is frail, often sick, his body wasted by extreme fasting and the cold stone floors of his Cistercian monastery. Yet in this fragile vessel burns a mind of terrifying brilliance and a will of iron. He is the rock star of 12th century theology. When Bernard speaks, popes listen and kings tremble. He is also conveniently related to Hugues de Payens. Historians still argue over the exact lineage, debating whether they were cousins or merely intimate friends from the same noble circle in Burgundy, but the connection is undeniably strong. Hugues comes to Bernard with a problem that is essentially a theological riddle. How can a Christian man, commanded by Christ to turn the other cheek, take up the sword? How can a monk whose life is dedicated to peace shed blood? It is a contradiction that has plagued the faithful for 1,000 years. Bernard, sitting in his austere cell where the only decoration is a wooden cross, takes up his quill and solves it. He writes a treatise titled De Laude Novae Militia, in praise of the new knighthood. It is a masterpiece of medieval branding. In it, Bernard argues that the Templars are not committing homicide when they kill the enemies of Christ. They are committing malicide, the killing of evil itself. He reframes the act of war. A secular knight fights for vanity, for land, for anger. A Templar fights only to cleanse the world of wickedness. The soldier of Christ kills safely, Bernard writes. He carries no sin. With these words, the floodgates open. The psychological barrier to holy war is shattered. The church is no longer just a shepherd. It has found its wolves. This intellectual victory leads to the Council of Troyes in January 1129. Imagine the scene: the great hall of the cathedral city, packed with archbishops, abbots, and papal legates. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax candles and the murmur of Latin. Hugues de Payens stands before them, no longer a dusty guardian of the road, but the prospective head of a new arm of the Church. Here, the Latin rule of the Templars is drafted, a document of 72 clauses that will govern every breath a Templar takes. It is a strict, grinding code of conduct, heavily influenced by Bernard's own Cistercian austerity. It dictates that the knights will eat in silence, listening to scripture while they chew, feeding the soul alongside the body. They are allowed meat only 3 times a week, for eating flesh is thought to breed corruption in the flesh. They must sleep in their shirts and breeches, with a lamp always burning in the dormitory, so that no dark deed can be done in the shadows. There are no private quarters, no private letters, no private wealth. Even their amusements are curtailed. The rule explicitly forbids the playing of chess and backgammon. Apparently, the competitive moving of little wooden pieces was considered a gateway drug to gambling and discord, which is perhaps fair, given how many family arguments have started over a board game. The rule goes further, regulating their interaction with the world. A Templar is forbidden to kiss any woman, not a widow, not a virgin, not a mother, not a sister, not an aunt. It is a life stripped of all softness, designed to turn men into instruments of divine will. But in exchange for this harshness, the council grants them their identity. It is here that they are assigned the white mantle, a garment of pure, unbleached wool. It symbolizes their step out of the darkness of the secular world and into the light of chastity. Later, under a different pope, the red cross patée will be added over the heart, signifying their willingness to suffer martyrdom, but for now it is just the white cloak. Picture Hugues de Payens receiving this mantle. He kneels on the stone floor, the heavy wool draped over his shoulders. It is warm, heavy, and smells of the sheep of Champagne. Around him, the council chants the Te Deum, the hymn of praise. He has arrived with nothing but a good idea and a tired horse. He leaves as the master of the first military order in the history of the West. The poor knights are poor no longer. As news of the council spreads, the nobility of Europe begins to respond. Younger sons who will inherit no land, guilt-ridden barons seeking absolution for their sins, and pious men yearning for purpose, they all turn their eyes toward the temple. Grants of land begin to arrive, first a trickle, then a river, a vineyard here, a watermill there, a manor house in England, a forest in Portugal. The infrastructure of an empire is being laid, deed by deed, parchment by parchment. But amidst this rising tide of bureaucracy and ink, let us not forget the human element. These are men who are choosing to walk away from the world. They are cutting their hair short, trimming their beards to a sensible length, and saying goodbye to the comforts of home. They are trading the chaotic freedom of the feudal lord for the absolute submission of the monk. As the section closes, imagine the quiet in the dormitory of a newly founded preceptory in France. The candles flicker in the draught. The knights lie on their simple pallets, the rough wool scratching their skin. They are miles from Jerusalem, but their minds are already there. The machinery of the church has blessed them, Bernard has justified them, and the world is watching. They are the new Maccabees, the holy avengers. But in the silence of the night, perhaps some of them wonder about the weight of the sword they have just picked up, and whether a man can truly kill without losing a piece of his own soul, no matter what the abbot of Clairvaux says in his beautiful Latin letters. With the spiritual mandate secured in the cool, echoey halls of Troyes, The Order turns its gaze back to the gritty, sun-bleached reality of the road. We move forward in time now, drifting through the middle decades of the 12th century. The initial fervour of the Crusade has settled into a complex, dangerous routine. The path from Europe to Jerusalem is no longer just a line on a map. It is a living artery of Christendom, pulsing with people. But travel in the Middle Ages is a terrifying proposition. To reach the Holy Land, a pilgrim might walk for months, crossing mountain ranges where wolves prowl and forests where outlaws wait. And they carry with them a fatal burden, their life savings. To fund a pilgrimage, often a once-in-a-lifetime bid for salvation, families sell their farms, their livestock, and their heirlooms, converting a lifetime of labour into a heavy, clinking sack of silver or gold. This sack is a magnet for every cutthroat from London to Antioch. A pilgrim is effectively a walking treasury with no lock. Here, in the dusty quiet of their commanderies, the Templars invent a solution that is arguably more revolutionary than their cavalry charges. They invent banking. It begins not with greed, but with logistics. The Order realises that the safest way to transport money is not to transport it at all. Picture a pilgrim in Paris, standing before the heavy oak doors of the local Templar preceptory. The air inside smells of beeswax and expensive ink. The pilgrim hands over his heavy sack of coins to a Templar brother, who counts it with the practised efficiency of a merchant, his chainmail clinking softly against the table edge. The money disappears into the Order's impenetrable vaults. In return, the pilgrim receives a small scrap of parchment. On it is a coded message, cryptic ciphers that only another Templar can read, indicating the value of the deposit. The pilgrim sews this scrap into the lining of his tunic and walks out, light as a feather. He can now cross the Alps and the Mediterranean with nothing worth stealing. When he arrives in Jerusalem, battered and exhausted, he presents the parchment to the Templar headquarters. The code is verified, the vault is opened, and he is given his money back in local currency, minus a reasonable transaction fee. It is the medieval equivalent of an ATM, or perhaps a traveller's cheque, though with significantly less plastic and arguably better customer service, as the tellers are heavily armed monks. This system relies entirely on a commodity more valuable than gold: trust. In a world where kings debase their currency and lords seize property on a whim, the Templars are unshakable. They answer only to the Pope. No local baron can audit their books or raid their vaults. This financial network transforms the Order. The poor fellow soldiers become the wealthiest corporation in the Mediterranean. Their commanderies, thousands of them, stretching from Scotland to Syria, act as branch offices. They are no longer just barracks. They are secure deposit boxes for the Western world. Kings, seeing the security the Templars offer, begin to use them as royal treasurers. The crown jewels of England are kept in the Temple in London. The taxes of France are managed by the Temple in Paris. The knights become the unsuspecting accountants of empires. But the wealth does not sit idle. It flows. It buys the one thing essential for holding the Holy Land: logistics. The Templars build their own navy, a fleet of sturdy, broad-beamed ships designed to transport horses and men across the sea. Imagine standing on the docks of Marseille or Bari in the 1160s. The smell of tar and salt is overwhelming. You watch as a Templar galley prepares for departure. It is a massive undertaking. Horses are terrified of the sea, and transporting a destrier, a war horse, requires special slings to keep the animal from thrashing and breaking a leg in the rolling swell. The Templars master this art. They run regular shipping lanes, ferrying fresh knights, weapons and grain to the east, and returning with spices, silk and sugar. They become the Amazon Prime of the Crusades, ensuring that a knight in the desert has a fresh mount and a sharp sword. courtesy of a farm in Yorkshire. Historians still argue about the extent of the Templars' usury. The Church strictly forbade lending money at interest. It was considered a sin, making money from time, which belongs only to God. The Templars, however, found creative workarounds that would make a modern tax attorney proud. They might lend a sum of money in one currency and ask for repayment in another, manipulating the exchange rate to include a profit. Or they might lend money to a landowner in exchange for the rights to harvest his crops for a set number of years. Technically, it wasn't interest, it was rent. Through these methods, they acquired vast tracts of land. A noble might borrow money to go on a crusade, mortgage his estate to the Templars, and if he died in battle, which was statistically very likely, the land became the property of the order. Slowly, the map of Europe becomes dotted with Templar holdings, a patchwork empire of farms, vineyards, and castles. Yet, amidst this golden rise, a strange tension begins to hum in the background, like a bowstring pulled too tight. The Templars are monks who have sworn a vow of poverty, yet they manage more wealth than the kings they serve. They are sworn to chastity, yet they live in the most cosmopolitan, temptation-filled cities of the East. They are warriors of peace who have become the bankers of war. In the preceptories of Europe, the brothers live simply, but the institution itself glitters. We see the emergence of a dual identity. The individual knight, who owns nothing but his sword and his cloak, and the order, which owns everything else. This accumulation of wealth creates a subtle shift in how the world views them. In the early days, they were the heroes, the brave few standing in the breach. Now, they are also the landlords, the debt collectors, the men who hold the mortgage on the castle. As the sun sets on this era of expansion, imagine the interior of a Templar vault in Paris. It is cool and dark, the silence absolute. Piles of silver deniers sit in iron-bound chests, waiting to be turned into swords or stone walls in the Holy Land. A single brother stands guard, his white mantle glowing faintly in the lantern light. He believes he is guarding the resources of God, the fuel for the holy fire. He cannot see that he is also guarding the seeds of his own destruction. Gold is heavy, but envy is heavier. The kings of Europe are watching this wealth accumulate, their own coffers empty from constant warring. They see the Templars not just as allies, but as a bank that might one day be robbed. But for now the system works. The roads are safer, the armies are fed, and the white mantles flutter from the masts of ships that rule the Mediterranean. The order is at its zenith, a bridge of gold connecting the west to the east, unaware that bridges are often the first things burned when the war comes home. We withdraw now from the bustling docks of Marseille and the counting houses of Paris, slipping through the heavy oak doors of a Templar preceptory to observe the hidden machinery of the order. The world sees the Templar as a figure of thunderous violence, a lance-wielding storm on the horizon. But here, inside the stone walls, the reality is a universe of hushed discipline and grinding routine. If the battlefield is where the Templar dies, the preceptory is where he kills the man he used to be. The daily life of a brother knight is a meticulously choreographed dance of prayer, silence, and suppression, designed to strip away the ego until only the instrument of God remains. It is a life lived almost entirely in the plural. There is no I in the temple, only we. The day begins not with the sun, but in the deepest bruise of the night. At roughly 2:06 a.m., a bell rings, a sharp bronze command cutting through the dormitory. This is matins. The knights rise instantly. The rule is specific. There is no grumbling, no stretching, no hitting a medieval snooze button. They sleep fully dressed in their shirt and breeches, ready for battle at a moment's notice, a practice that likely made the dormitory smell less like a sanctuary and more like a locker room after a double shift. They slip on their shoes and move in silence to the chapel. There is no talking. The only sounds are the shuffling of leather soles on stone and the rustling of heavy wool. In the chapel, they recite 13 Pater Nosters, the Lord's Prayer for Matins. The architecture of their life is built on these prayers. They are the mortar holding the day together. After Matins, they might check their horses. A Templar's first duty is always to his mount, often valued more highly than his own life, before returning to bed for a brief snatch of sleep until the bell for prime rings at sunrise. When the light finally bleeds into the sky, the visual hierarchy of the order becomes clear. The brothers are divided by the colour of their soul's uniform. The knights, men of noble birth, wear the iconic white mantle, symbolising purity and the rejection of the dark, secular world. The sergeants, men of common birth, who serve as light cavalry and support staff, wear mantles of black or brown, but regardless of colour, the clothing is deliberately anti-fashion. In an era where noblemen wore pointed shoes, velvet doublets, and long flowing hair, the Templars are aggressively plain. The rule dictates that their hair be cut short so that they may see before and behind, a practical measure for combat, but also a rejection of vanity. However, they are commanded to grow beards. In a clean-shaven West, the bushy, unkempt beard of the Templar becomes their trademark, a symbol of their oriental service, marking them as men who live on the savage frontier of the faith. Mealtime is a ritual as strict as the Mass. They eat in a refectory, similar to monks, but with a military edge. Silence is absolute. If a brother needs the salt, he does not ask. He uses a system of hand signs, a silent language of necessity. While they eat, a chaplain reads scripture aloud, ensuring that while their bodies digest bread and pottage, their minds digest the laws of God. The menu is far better than that of the average peasant, designed to fuel athletic bodies. They eat meat 3 times a week, plenty of protein for sword arms, and on other days they consume elaborate vegetable stews, cheese and fish. Curiously, the rule mandates that knights eat in pairs, sharing a single bowl between 2 men. Historians often analyse this as a symbolic gesture of brotherhood and poverty, ensuring that one knight does not hoard the best cuts of meat while his brother gets the gristle. It forces a quiet intimacy and mutual care, though one can imagine the subtle, silent negotiation that occurs when the last piece of mutton is floating in the broth. But these men are not just praying monks, they are killers in training. The hours between prayers are filled with the maintenance of war. A Templar does not hunt in the traditional sense. The rule explicitly forbids hawking and the hunting of stag or boar, frivolous aristocratic pastimes that lead to excitement and distraction. However, there is a fascinating exception. They are allowed to hunt lions. In the Holy Land, lions were a genuine threat to pilgrims and livestock. Hunting them was considered a form of combat training and public service, the only time a Templar could unleash his aggression against a beast. When not hunting lions or polishing armour, they drill. They practice the charge, the devastating coordinated strike that is their signature tactic. It requires telepathic timing. A Templar charge is not a stampede. It is a single crushing wall of iron hitting the enemy line at the exact same second. This synchronization is forged here, in the dust of the practice yard, under the watchful eye of the marshal. The glue that holds this high-pressure society together is the weekly chapter meeting. This is the heart of Templar governance and, arguably, the seed of their eventual doom. Once a week, the community gathers in a closed room. It is a tribunal of the self. Brothers are expected to confess their faults openly. I broke silence in the refectory, or I lost my temper with a sergeant. If a brother does not confess, others are duty-bound to accuse him. It is a system of radical transparency designed to crush individual pride. Punishments are swift and physical. For minor infractions, a brother might be sentenced to eat his meals on the floor with the dogs, a humbling experience, though the dogs were likely happy for the company and the scraps. For grave sins, like cowardice or simony, a brother could be flogged, stripped of his mantle, and expelled. This intense secrecy of the chapter meeting, where what is said in the room stays in the room, is intended to protect the dignity of the brothers and the honour of the order. They wash their dirty linen in private, away from the mocking eyes of secular knights, but to the outside world this closed door breeds suspicion. When men gather in secret, lock the doors, and post armed guards, the human imagination fills in the blanks. Locals whisper, "What are they doing in there? Why can we not see?" Over decades, these whispers of secret discipline will metastasize into legends of dark rituals, of spitting on the cross, of worshipping severed heads. The very mechanism designed to ensure their purity becomes the canvas for the world's darkest projections. As evening falls, over the preceptory, the bell for Compline rings. The day ends as it began. In prayer, the brothers drink a final glass of water or wine, strictly regulated of course, and receive their instructions for the next day. They process to the dormitory in silence. The rule dictates that a lamp must burn all night in the sleeping quarters, a perpetual light to ward off the demons of the dark and ensure that no brother behaves inappropriately in the shadows. They lie down, exhausted, muscles aching from the drill, bellies full of simple food, minds washed clean by scripture. They are a weapon in its scabbard, resting. In the silence of the dormitory, broken only by the shifting of straw mattresses and the snoring of 50 lethally trained monks, there is a profound, heavy peace. They have surrendered everything, their names, their wills, their futures, to the order. They are safe in the womb of the brotherhood, unaware that the walls they have built to keep the world out will eventually be the very walls that trap them in. The golden age of the coin and the quill dissolves now into the blinding white heat of the Galilee. We move forward to the summer of 1187, a year that will be burned into the memory of Christendom like a brand. The cool stone halls of the European commanderies feel a world away. Here, the air itself is an enemy. It is early July, and the sun beats down on the Holy Land with a ferocity that turns armour into an oven and helmets into kettles. The political landscape has shifted beneath the Templars' feet. For decades, the Crusader states survived because their enemies were divided, a fractured mosaic of emirs and warlords squabbling over sand. But history hates a vacuum. A new power has risen to unify the Islamic world. Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known to the West simply as Saladin. He is a man of culture, generosity, and terrifying strategic patience, and he has successfully encircled the Christian kingdom. The wolf is no longer at the door, he is inside the house, and he has brought fire. The tragedy begins not with a clash of swords, but with a clash of egos at the springs of Safaria. The Crusader army, the largest ever assembled in the kingdom, is camped near limitless water. They are safe here. Count Raymond of Tripoli, a veteran lord with a face weathered by the Levant sun, advises caution. He tells King Guy of Lusignan, a man whose handsomeness is exceeded only by his indecision, to wait. "Let Saladin come to us," Raymond urges. "Let him cross the waterless plain." But the king's ear is poisoned by the Grand Master of the Templars, Gerard de Riedefort. Gerard is a figure of dark fascination for historians. Impulsive, arrogant, and seemingly incapable of strategic thought, He is the kind of leader who mistakes caution for cowardice. He goads the king, whispering that to wait is to shame the crown. It is a classic boardroom disaster, medieval style. The loudest voice in the room overrules the smartest one. King Guy orders the march. On July 3rd, the army leaves the springs. They walk into hell. The distance to Tiberias is only a day's march, but they are moving 20,000 men and horses across a limestone plateau that acts as a mirror for the sun. They carry the holiest relic in Christendom, the true cross, a fragment of the wood on which Christ died, encased in gold, believing it guarantees victory. But wood cannot conjure water. By noon, the canteens are dry. The Templars, forming the rear guard, are harassed constantly by Saladin's light cavalry. Arrows fall like rain, not to kill, but to slow. The column crawls. Men begin to faint, their tongues swelling in their mouths. Saladin, watching from the hills, knows he has already won. He orders his men to set fire to the dry scrub brush upwind of the Crusaders. Now, they fight not only thirst and heat, but choking, blinding smoke. It is psychological warfare of the highest order. They camp that night in a waterless void, listening to the Muslim soldiers singing and pouring water onto the ground within earshot to torment them. When dawn breaks on July 4th, at the horns of Hattin, a volcanic twin-peaked hill, the Christian army is a broken animal. The battle that follows is less a contest and more a slaughter. The infantry, maddened by thirst, abandons the knights and surges toward the Sea of Galilee, only to be cut down. The Templars and Hospitallers fight with desperate, robotic discipline, charging again and again into the smoke, but they are surrounded. The chaotic melee sees the flower of chivalry collapse under the weight of exhaustion. The king's red tent is overrun. The golden cross, the talisman of their faith, is torn from the hands of the dying Bishop of Acre and hoisted upside down by Saladin's troops. The shock of this moment cannot be overstated. For the Templars, it is as if the sky itself has cracked open. God has not just remained silent, he has allowed his own symbol to be captured. The aftermath of Hattin reveals the specific hatred Saladin holds for the military orders. While he treats King Guy with royal courtesy, offering him a cup of iced rose water in his own tent, he has no such mercy for the Templars. To Saladin, secular knights are soldiers doing a job. They can be ransomed and sent home. But the Templars and Hospitallers are firebrands, religious fanatics who will never stop fighting. They are the weeds in his garden that must be pulled by the root. He orders every captured Templar and Hospitaller to be separated from the other prisoners. There are roughly 230 of them. In the soft golden light of the late afternoon, with the smoke of battle still drifting across the lake, these men are led away. Saladin gives them a choice: convert to Islam and live or die. The historical record, usually so fractured, is unanimous here. Not a single Templar begs. Not one renounces his vows. They are tired, bloody and defeated, covered in dust and defeat. Yet they kneel in the sand with a terrifying calm. Sufi mystics and scholars from Saladin's camp volunteer to act as executioners, believing there is merit in slaying these arch-enemies of the faith. It is a messy, brutal business, lacking the grace of a clean execution, but the knights do not break. They die as they lived, stubborn, united, and utterly convinced of their righteousness. It is said that the newly recruited Templars, who had only worn the mantle for days, rushed forward to be the first to die, eager to secure their martyrdom. It is a level of commitment that is difficult for the modern mind to grasp, a terrifying triumph of a spirit over survival instinct. The defeat at Hattin breaks the back of the Latin kingdom. With the field army destroyed, the cities and castles are left undefended. Saladin sweeps through the Holy Land like a tide. Acre, Nablus, Jaffa, Sidon, Beirut. They fall like dominoes. Finally, in October, Jerusalem itself surrenders. The city the Templars were created to protect is gone. The Order has lost its headquarters, its army, its relic, and its reputation for invincibility. Yet, paradoxically, Hatton ensures their survival. Europe reacts to the news with horror. The loss of Jerusalem triggers the Third Crusade, bringing Richard, the Lionheart, and Philip Augustus to the east. The Templars are needed again. They are the only ones who know the land, the only ones with the network to manage the logistics of a new war. They rise from the ashes of Hatton not humbled, but harder. They have stared extinction in the face and blinked. However, a subtle shift occurs in the psyche of the Order. They have seen the true cross taken. They have seen their Grand Master, Gerard de Riedefort, captured and eventually executed. After being ransomed once and making yet more terrible decisions, a man whose career serves as a grim reminder that confidence does not equal competence. The aura of divine protection is shattered. They now understand that they are fighting a war of attrition, one that cannot be won by faith alone, but by stone, coin, and politics. As we close this chapter, let the camera pull back from the horns of Hatton. The sun has set, and the battlefield is quiet, save for the crying of jackals. The bodies of the Templars lie in rows, their white mantles stained dark, looking like fallen petals on the dry earth. The wind blows from the Sea of Galilee, cooling the rocks that baked all day. The true cross is moving east, carried in triumph to Damascus. The Templars have paid the ultimate price for the arrogance of their leaders. But in the west, the bells are beginning to toll. The mourning will turn to anger, and the anger will bring new iron to the east. The Order is down, but the war is far from over. The dream of Jerusalem is dying, but the business of the crusade is just beginning to boom. The camera of history glides forward now, blurring through a century of struggle to rest upon the year 1291. We find ourselves standing on the ramparts of a city that feels less like a holy sanctuary and more like a desperate, glittering cage. Acre. For 100 years since the loss of Jerusalem, this port city has served as the beating heart of the Crusader kingdom. It is a place of contradictions, a bustling, cosmopolitan metropolis where Italian merchants trade silk and spice, where church bells compete with the call to prayer, and where the military orders have built their own fortress cities within the city walls. But the atmosphere has changed. The sun that rises over the Mediterranean no longer shines on a kingdom of hope, but on a sliver of land clinging to the sea. The enemy has evolved. The chivalrous Saladin is long dead, replaced by the Mamluks, a caste of slave soldiers who overthrew their masters in Egypt to forge a dynasty of iron. They do not play by the old rules of courtly warfare. They are professional, ruthless, and determined to push the Franks into the sea once and for all. The wolf is not just at the door, he is tearing the house down, stone by stone. Inside the Templar fortress, at the southern tip of the promontory, the Grand Master, Guillaume de Beaujeu, stands looking north. He is a capable, pragmatic man, a seasoned diplomat who speaks Arabic and understands the shifting tides of politics better than any king in Europe. But understanding the tide does not mean you can stop it. He knows what is coming. The Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil has marched from Cairo with an army that defies comprehension. Chroniclers speak of 160,000 infantry and 60,000 cavalry, figures that are likely exaggerated by fear, but the reality is terrifying enough. The horizon is choked with tents. The Mamluks have brought with them engines of war that make earlier catapults look like toys, massive trebuchets with names like the Furious and the Victorious are being assembled on the plain. They are capable of hurling stones weighing hundreds of pounds, smashing through limestone walls as if they were made of sugar. The siege begins in April, and the noise is the first thing that breaks the spirit. The Mamluk drummers beat a rhythm that never stops, a thumping heartbeat of doom that denies the defenders sleep. The bombardment is relentless. Day and night, the sky rains stone and Greek fire, pots of flammable naphtha that explode on impact, sticking to skin and stone, burning with a heat that water cannot quench. The Templars, along with the Hospitallers and the Knights of the King of Jerusalem, fight with a desperate mechanic fury. They launch sorties at night, riding out on their heavy chargers into the Mamluk camps, trying to burn the siege engines. It is a collision of worlds, the heavy, armoured chivalry of the West smashing into the disciplined, light manoeuvres of the East. But for every Mamluk soldier they kill, 10 more seem to rise from the dust. The defenders are bleeding out, not just in men, but in morale. Europe, distracted by its own petty squabbles, has sent only token help. The Holy Land has become a bad investment, a story people are tired of hearing. By mid-May, the walls are crumbling. The focus of the attack is the accursed tower, the linchpin of the city's defences. The Mamluk sappers, engineers who dig tunnels under the walls to collapse them, have done their work. On May 18th, the final assault begins. It is a scene of apocalyptic intensity. The Mamluks surge forward to the sound of cymbals and drums, a human wave crashing against the breach. Guillaume de Beaujeu leads the defence. He is not hiding in a command tent. He is in the thick of the melee, wielding his sword in the shadow of the crumbling tower. It is here that the history of the Crusader states effectively ends. The Grand Master raises his arm to direct a counter-charge and is struck by a javelin. It pierces his side deep into the chest. As his knights rush to him, he is carried away, gasping, "Je ne m'enfuis pas, je suis mort." I am not fleeing, I am dead. Panic sweeps through the city like a contagion. The civilian population floods toward the harbour, desperate to board the few Venetian ships remaining. It is a chaotic, heartbreaking exodus. Wealthy merchants bribe captains with bags of jewels for a spot on a rowboat. Mothers scream for children lost in the crush. The sea is dotted with overloaded skiffs, some capsizing under the weight of the refugees. But the Templars do not run. They retreat to their fortress by the sea, the strongest point in the city. Here they make their last stand. It is a moment that feels lifted from myth, yet it is grounded in the cold, hard stones of archaeology. The fortress is a massive complex, a city within a city, and for 10 days, the remaining Templars hold out against the entire Mamluk army. They negotiate a surrender, allowing them to leave with their weapons, and for the refugees inside to be spared. The Mamluk Sultan agrees, but when the Mamluk soldiers enter the fortress to oversee the evacuation, they begin to molest the women and harass the civilians. The Templars, enraged by this breach of honour, slam the gates shut. They slaughter the Mamluk detachment inside and hoist the Beauseant flag back up. They choose death over dishonour. The Sultan, furious, orders the fortress to be undermined. The sappers dig beneath the great seaside tower. On May 28th, the foundations give way. With a sound like the earth splitting open, the fortress collapses, burying the last of the Templars and hundreds of their enemies in a single, dusty tomb. The fall of Acre is the psychological death of the Crusades. The dream of a Christian East is buried in the rubble. The survivors, a handful of Templars who escaped by sea, including the future Grand Master Jacques de Molay, sail to Cyprus. They are refugees now. They have their treasury, their ships, and their pride, but they have lost their raison d'être, their reason for existing. A warrior monk without a war is a dangerous anomaly. As they sit in their temporary headquarters in Cyprus, looking out over the water toward the lost coast of Syria, a quiet existential dread begins to settle over the order. They are incredibly wealthy, owning thousands of estates across Europe, yet they have failed in their one divine mission. Historians still argue whether the order could have reinvented itself. The Hospitallers, their rivals, quickly pivoted, conquering the island of Rhodes and becoming a naval police force, fighting pirates and keeping themselves relevant. But the Templars seemed frozen, dreaming of a grand reconquest that Europe had no appetite for. They were like an old soldier polishing a rusted metal, unable to see that the world had moved on. They turn their eyes west toward France, the place of their birth. They believe they are returning to the safety of home, to the lands that sustain them. They do not realize that they are sailing out of the fire and into the frying pan. In the east, they faced honest enemies who wanted their land. In the west, they will face friends who want their gold. The destruction of the body at Acre was brutal, but it was honourable. The destruction of the soul that awaits them in Europe will be far more cruel. The silence of the sea surrounds them now. The only sound the creaking of the ship's timbers, as they carry the ghost of the Holy Land back to a continent that has forgotten how to weep for it. The salt spray of the Mediterranean fades behind us now, replaced by the damp, bone-chilling fog of the Seine. We step off the ships and onto the muddy banks of France, moving forward to the early years of the 14th century, specifically around 1306. The transition is jarring. The Templars have returned to the land of their birth, but they are no longer the sons of the soil. They are ghosts of a dream that Europe has woken up from. To the average Parisian peasant shivering in the drizzle, these knights look less like saviours and more like exotic, dangerous strangers. They carry the sun of the Levant in their skin. Their faces are weathered like old leather, and their beards, thick, unruly, and grey, mark them as separate in a fashion-conscious court where men now shave their chins smooth to show off their jawlines. They smell of strange spices. They speak a dialect of French peppered with Arabic and Turkish phrases, and they walk with the rolling gait of men who have spent decades in the saddle or on the deck of a galley. They have come home, but home has changed. The fervour of the Crusades has cooled into a cynical pragmatism. The Holy Land is lost, and the tax-paying public is beginning to ask a dangerous question. If the Holy Sepulchre is gone, why are we still paying for the army that failed to protect it? The Templars, however, seem deaf to this grumbling. They retreat into their own world, specifically the Villeneuve du Temple in Paris. Imagine this place not merely as a building, but as a sovereign island of stone in the middle of a wooden city. Located in the Marais district, which was then a swampy marshland that the knights, with their engineering prowess, drained and gentrified, the temple is a fortress that rivals the Louvre. It is a sprawling complex of towers, crenellated walls and heavy gates guarded by men who have killed Mamluks and survived assassins. At its heart stands the Great Tower, the Grosse Tour, a massive keep with walls so thick that they keep the interior cool in summer and freezing in winter. This is the headquarters of the Order in the West, the nerve centre of a multinational corporation that answers to no king. Inside these walls, the king's law does not apply. It is a sanctuary. A criminal fleeing the royal police needs only to touch the door knocker of the temple to be safe. This legal immunity, once a gift to protect holy men, now feels like an arrogant challenge to the monarchy. It is a state within a state, a cancer of independence growing in the belly of France. Inside the Great Tower, the financial machinery hums with a quiet, terrifying efficiency. The Templars are now the royal treasurers, the unofficial central bank of France. It is a relationship of uncomfortable intimacy. The king, Philip IV, keeps his own accounts here. His tax collectors bring their revenues to the temple, not the palace. The knights count the coins, audit the ledgers, and issue the loans that keep the government running. It is a situation ripe with irony. The King of France, the most powerful monarch in Christendom, is essentially living paycheck to paycheck, dependent on the allowance granted to him by a group of warrior monks. Historians still argue whether the Templars realised the danger of this position. To be the creditor of a king is a position of power, certainly, but it is also a position of extreme peril. When you owe a man 5 gold pieces, he is your master. When you owe him 5 million, he is your enemy. The Templars, in their confidence, likely believed that their spiritual immunity would protect their material wealth. They forgot that gold has no religion. Presiding over this empire of stone and ledger is the Grand Master Jacques de Molay. We must pause to look at him, for he is the tragic anchor of our story. He is not a scheming villain or a greedy banker. He is, by all accounts, a simple, unimaginative soldier. Born in Burgundy around 1244, he has spent his entire life in the service of the Order. He is a man of the old school, pious, rigid, and utterly obsessed with the idea of a new crusade. He lacks the political dexterity of his predecessors. He sees the world in black and white, Christians and infidels, while the world around him is painting in shades of grey. He has come to France not to retire, but to rally support for one last great expedition to retake Jerusalem. He travels with a retinue that would shame a duke, carrying books, relics, and chests of gold. He believes he is negotiating with allies. He does not see that he is walking into a trap set by a man who views allies merely as future assets to be liquidated. The tension is exacerbated by a proposal floating through the courts of Europe, the merger of the orders. Kings and popes alike have suggested that the Templars and the Hospitallers should combine into a single Order of Jerusalem. It makes perfect logistical sense. One administration, one army, less overhead. The Hospitallers are open to the idea, or at least polite about it. But Jacques de Molay refuses. He writes long, tedious memoranda explaining why it is impossible, arguing that the competition between the orders makes them fight harder, which is a bit like arguing that 2 fire departments are better than one because they'll race to the burning building. His refusal is seen as arrogance, a stubborn clinging to power. It alienates the Pope Clement IV, who is desperate for a win. Molay's stubbornness is rooted in pride, but it is read as obstructionism. He is an analog man in a digital age, trying to explain the importance of heavy cavalry charges to bureaucrats who are interested in tax yields and centralization. Yet, despite this friction, there is a strange, familial closeness between the Order and the Crown. Jacques de Molay is the godfather to one of King Philip's sons. He walked in the funeral procession of Philip's wife, Queen Joan of Navarre. The Templars are deeply embedded in the royal household. This intimacy makes the looming betrayal even more chilling. It suggests that Philip's plan was not a sudden burst of anger, but a cold, calculated amputation. He smiles at Molay across the banquet table, accepts the loans, and nods at the stories of the East, all while his lawyers are quietly sharpening their quills. The Templars feel safe because they are family, but they fail to realise that for Philip, the state comes before everything, even godfathers. The atmosphere in Paris in these years is thick with a specific kind of urban resentment. The common people, struggling with currency devaluations, caused in part by Philip's disastrous economic policies, look at the temple and see a horde. Rumours begin to circulate, likely planted by royal agents, but finding fertile ground in the public imagination. Why are the Templar meetings held at night? Why are they so secretive? If they have nothing to hide, why are the walls so high? The medieval mind is prone to magical thinking. Where there is secrecy, there must be sorcery. The Templars, in their isolation, do not engage in public relations. They do not distribute bread to the poor with the same visibility as the Franciscans. They are distant, armoured, and rich. Being a heavily armed banker is a surefire way to ensure nobody complains about overdraft fees to your face, but it does not win you hearts and minds. As the sun sets over the Seine, casting long shadows from the towers of the Temple across the cobblestones of Paris, the stage is set. The actors are in place. The victim is comfortable, unsuspecting, resting on a mattress of gold. The predator is watching from the Louvre, hungry and patient. The Templars believe their greatest threat lies across the sea, in the scimitars of the Mamluks. They are training their horses for the desert, unaware that the real war will be fought in the dungeons of the city they protect. They are strangers in their own land, speaking a language of honour that is no longer spoken here. They have built a fortress that can withstand any army, but they have forgotten to build a defence against the one thing that can walk through walls, a lie whispered in the right ear. The silence of the temple is not the silence of peace, it is the silence of a held breath before the scream. We turn our lens now from the victim to the predator, zooming in on the stone corridors of the royal palace on the Ile de la Cité. The year is still roughly 1306, but the temperature of our story drops dramatically. We are entering the orbit of King Philip IV of France, known to history as Philippe le Bel, Philip the Fair. But do not let the name fool you. He was called Fair solely for his beauty, for he was a man of striking statuesque perfection, with pale skin, blue eyes, and long blonde hair that fell in waves around a face that rarely moved. His contemporaries found him terrifying. The Bishop of Pamiers famously described him not as a man, but as a beast. He is neither man nor beast. He is a statue. Philip was an enigma, a king who spoke little, smiled never, and stared at his courtiers with unblinking, heavy-lidded eyes. He did not rule with the roaring charisma of a lion, but with the silent, crushing pressure of a python. He was the Iron King, a man who believed with a terrifying, icy piety that he was God's chosen instrument on earth, and therefore anything he did for France was, by definition, the will of heaven. But for all his divine confidence, Philip had a very human problem. He was broke. The French crown was drowning in debt. Philip had spent years fighting costly, grinding wars against England and Flanders, conflicts that sucked the treasury dry faster than taxes could refill it. He had tried everything to raise cash. He had taxed the clergy, infuriating the Pope. He had debased the currency, melting down silver coins and remixing them with cheaper metals to stretch the supply, a disastrous economic trick that caused inflation to skyrocket. The shopkeepers of Paris, realizing their money was suddenly worth half as much, rioted. In a moment of supreme irony, when the mob surrounded the royal palace baying for blood, Philip fled for safety. And where did he run? He ran to the strongest fortress in Paris, the headquarters of the Knights Templar. Imagine the scene. The King of France, pale and trembling, is ushered through the heavy gates of the temple. The riot noise fades instantly behind the thick walls. He is safe here, protected by the very men he will soon destroy. For several days, Philip lives as a guest of the order. He walks their halls. He sees the discipline, the power, and most importantly, the vault. He sees the sheer scale of the Templar operation, the chests of silver, the piles of gold plate, the meticulous ledgers recording the debts of half of Europe. It must have been maddening for him. Here he was, the anointed king, hiding from his own subjects in the home of monks who were wealthier than the state. Historians often point to this moment as the turning point. It was not just greed that was born in those few days. It was a cold, jealous realization that the Templars were a state within a state, a rival power that held the keys to his own survival. Philip's need for money was not just a matter of lifestyle, it was an existential crisis for the monarchy. He had already liquidated other targets. In 1306, just a year prior to the attack on the Templars, he had turned on the Jews of France. In a sudden, brutal move, he arrested them, seized their property, and expelled them from the kingdom, keeping their assets to fill his empty purse. It was a smash-and-grab robbery disguised as royal policy, but the money from the Jewish expulsion was a mere drop in the bucket. It was gone in months. He needed a bigger target. He needed a whale. And there, sitting in the marshes of the Marais, fat with the interest of 2 centuries of banking, was the temple. But attacking the Templars was not like attacking a marginalised community. The Templars were the church. They were the Pope's private army. To touch them was to touch the hem of God's garment. Philip knew he could not simply rob them. That would make him a tyrant. He had to destroy them morally first. He had to transform these heroes of the Crusade into monsters so repellent that no one would dare defend them. This is where the genius of his administration comes into play. Philip was the first modern king in the sense that he surrounded himself not with nobles who ruled by blood, but with lawyers who ruled by ink. These men, his legists, were a new breed, middle class, fiercely loyal, and utterly ruthless. They did not care about chivalry. They cared about precedent and loopholes. Chief among them was Guillaume de Nogaret, the keeper of the seals. If Philip was the silent statue, Nogaret was the knife in its hand. Nogaret had a personal axe to grind against the church. His own parents had been burned as heretics, and he possessed a dark, creative brilliance for propaganda. He understood that the bigger the lie, the more likely people were to believe it. He and Philip looked at the Templars and saw vulnerability where others saw strength. The Order's secrecy, once a shield, could be painted as suspicion. Their wealth, once a sign of divine favour, could be painted as greed. Their close-knit brotherhood could be painted as unnatural vice. The atmosphere in the royal court shifts during these months. The grand feasts and tournaments continue, but underneath the music there is a low hum of preparation. Philip is a man who plays the long game. He begins to cultivate a relationship with the Pope, Clement V, a weak man who had recently moved the papacy to Avignon, effectively bringing the church under the shadow of the French crown. Philip whispers to Clement that he is concerned about the purity of the church. He positions himself not as a debtor trying to erase his loans, but as a concerned Christian worried about rumours. It is gaslighting on a geopolitical scale. As the year 1307 approaches, the financial noose tightens. The wars in Flanders are flaring up again. The soldiers need to be paid. The creditors are knocking. Philip sits in his solar, looking out over the Seine, his face an unreadable mask. He knows that the Templars have lent him massive sums, money he has no intention of paying back. In fact, he intends to cancel the debt by cancelling the creditor. It is a chilling calculation. There is no heat in it, no passion. It is simply the logic of a man who believes that the state is an altar that demands blood. We must pause to appreciate the tragedy of the Templars' blindness. Jacques de Molay is still visiting the court, still chatting with the king, still believing that his biggest problem is the merger with the Hospitallers. He brings Philip gifts. He likely discusses the plans for a new crusade, unaware that Philip is looking at his neck and wondering how it would look in a noose. The Templars are protected by their history, by their arrogance, and by the assumption that the rules of the world are static. They do not see that Philip is rewriting the rules. They are playing chess while Philip is lighting the board on fire. The section closes with a sense of gathering storm. The Iron King has made his decision. The target is locked. The empty purse will be filled, and the power of the monarchy will be absolute. All that is needed now is the ammunition. The king turns to his lawyers, to Nogaret, and gives a silent nod. The machinery of destruction begins to turn. The ink is mixed. The spies are dispatched. The stage is being set for the greatest show trial in the Middle Ages, and the only thing missing is the script. But in the dark corners of the kingdom, the whispers are already starting to take shape. The king does not need the truth. He needs a story. And as we will see, he is about to tell a story so horrific that it will burn the Knights Templar out of history and into the realm of nightmare. The architecture of the conspiracy is now complete, but the king needs a key to open the door of destruction. He cannot simply arrest the Pope's private army on a whim. He needs evidence. And so, we descend from the high, cold towers of the royal palace into the murky, torch-lit underbelly of the medieval world. We enter the realm of the whisper. In an age without newspapers, radio, or internet, the rumour is the most dangerous weapon in existence. It travels faster than a horse, grows stronger with every retelling, and requires no proof to take root. Philip's master of propaganda, Guillaume de Nogaret, understands this physics perfectly. He knows that to kill the Templars, he must first kill their reputation. He needs a voice from the inside, a witness who can stand before the world and say, "I saw it. Enter Esquin de Floiran." History is often shaped by great men, but sometimes it is steered by the petty, the vindictive, and the desperate. Esquin is a figure who slithers out of the margins of the chronicle, a former Templar, or perhaps a prior of Montfaucon, the record is murky, who has fallen from grace. He sits in a prison cell in Toulouse, awaiting sentencing for crimes that likely include murder or corruption. He is a man with nothing to lose and everything to trade. He sends word that he has a secret so dark it will shake the pillars of Christendom, but he will only whisper it to the king. Philip, sensing the opportunity, grants him an audience. In the quiet of the royal solar, Esquin spins a tale that is almost too horrific to be invented, or perhaps perfectly crafted to be believed. He claims that the order is not a brotherhood of holy warriors, but a synagogue of Satan. He tells the king that during the initiation ceremony, new recruits are not welcomed with prayer, but with blasphemy. They are taken into a secret room, he claims, and forced to deny Christ. They are shown a crucifix and ordered to spit on it. They are told that Jesus was a false prophet, a criminal, not the Son of God. But the depravity does not stop there. Esquin whispers of unnatural acts. He claims that the brothers are encouraged to kiss each other on the mouth, the navel, and the base of the spine. A bizarre detail that adds a layer of perverse specificity to the lie. He speaks of institutionalized sodomy, claiming that the rule obliges brothers to submit to one another's lusts to avoid the temptation of women. And finally, the cherry on this poisoned cake, the worship of an idol, a bearded head, sometimes called Baphomet, which the Templars adore as their saviour. It is a masterpiece of fabrication. Esquin has taken the standard heresy checklist used against the Cathars and other enemies of the Church and applied it to the most orthodox order in the world. But Nogaret sees the genius in it. The accusations are designed to trigger a visceral, emotional revulsion. Spitting on the cross? In the deeply religious 14th century, this is not just an insult, it is a nuclear detonation of the soul. It frames the Templars, not just as bad Christians, but as active anti-Christians, moles burrowed deep inside the church to rot it from within. Nogaret takes these raw, jagged lies and polishes them into a legal narrative. He begins a campaign of information leakage. Agents of the king infiltrate the taverns, the marketplaces, and the pilgrim hostels. They drop hints. Have you heard why the Templars always meet at night? My cousin knows a stable boy who heard strange chanting. They say they have sold the Holy Land to the Sultan for gold. The rumours spread like a contagion. The public, already resentful of the Templars' wealth and arrogance, is primed to believe the worst. It is the confirmation bias of the masses. They want to believe that the rich, secretive bankers are evil, and now they are being told exactly how evil they are. Scholars still debate the kernel of truth in these lies. Was there a hazing ritual? Some historians suggest that the Templars might have used a testing ceremony where a recruit was asked to spit on the cross to test his absolute obedience, a simulation of what might happen if he were captured by Saracens. If you cannot obey me and spit on this wood, the master might say, how will you obey me in battle? It is a plausible theory, suggesting that a rough military initiation rite was twisted by Esquin and Nogaret into evidence of heresy. It's the difference between a boot camp drill sergeant screaming insults to toughen you up and a cult leader brainwashing you. Context is everything, but in the court of public opinion, nuance is the first casualty. Meanwhile, Jacques de Molay hears the distant thunder but misjudges the storm. He is aware of the rumours. In fact, he is so concerned that he goes to the Pope himself. In a tragic act of naivety, Molay asks Clement V to launch an official inquiry to clear the order's name. He wants a trial. He wants the truth to come out, believing that the sunlight of a papal investigation will burn away the fog of slander. He does not realise that he is effectively handing Nogaret the legal weapon he needs. By asking for an investigation, Molay validates the rumours. He makes them official. Pope Clement, trying to navigate the pressure from King Philip, agrees to look into it, but he moves slowly, hoping the whole thing will blow over. Clement is a man trying to balance a boulder on a tightrope. He wants to protect the Templars, but he is terrified of the king. In the weeks leading up to the final strike, the atmosphere in Paris grows heavy. The king's spies are everywhere. They are watching the comings and goings at the temple. They are noting who visits, who leaves, and where the gold is stored. Nogaret is drafting the arrest warrants. These are not hasty scribbles. They are eloquent, thunderous documents that paint the king as a grieving defender of the faith. A bitter thing, a lamentable thing. The warrant begins, describing the abominable wickedness of the Templars. The language is designed to terrify the local officials who will open the sealed orders. It frames the arrest not as a police action, but as a divine necessity. The psychological preparation is total. The king withdraws from the Templars. The smiles at court disappear. The invitations stop coming. Yet the Templars in the Villeneuve du Temple continue their routine. They wake for matins. They polish their armour. They balance the king's ledgers. There is a heartbreaking normalcy to their final days. They are like passengers on a ship who continue to dine and dance while the captain steers them directly into an iceberg. They rely on their immunity, their history, their papal bulls. They trust the system. They trust the law. They do not understand that for men like Philip and Nogaret, the law is not a wall to protect the innocent, but a sword to cut them down. Esquin de Floyran, the architect of the lie, fades back into the shadows, his work done. He will later be rewarded with money and land, though history suggests he did not enjoy it for long. Traitors rarely die peacefully in their beds, but his whisper has become a roar. The poison has entered the bloodstream of France. The king has the motive, the weapon, and the witness. The trap is set. All that remains is to spring it. As the autumn leaves begin to turn gold and brown along the banks of the Seine, the countdown begins. The most powerful military order in history is about to be blindsided by a force they never trained to fight, the bureaucratic machinery of a state that has decided they are worth more dead than alive. The night of October 12th, 1307, is heavy with a silence that feels unnatural. Across the length and breadth of France, from the misty coasts of Normandy to the sun-drenched vineyards of Languedoc, royal messengers have reached their destinations. They have ridden hard, carrying leather pouches sealed with the king's wax. In the houses of seneschals, bailiffs and provosts, the local arms of royal law, men sit by candlelight, holding these packets. The instructions on the outside are clear. Do not open until dawn on Friday the 13th. It is a masterstroke of synchronized timing, a logistical feat that would be impressive in the age of the telegraph, let alone in an age of muddy roads and tired horses. Philip, therefore, has turned the entire administrative machinery of France into a single coiled spring. As the first grey light of dawn bleeds into the sky on Friday, October 13th, the seals are broken, the orders are read. The eyes of the officials likely widen in disbelief. They are not being told to arrest a local bandit or a tax evader. They are being ordered to arrest the soldiers of Christ. Every Templar in France, knight, sergeant, priest, and servant, is to be seized simultaneously. Their property is to be confiscated. They are to be held in strict isolation. And crucial to Nogaret's plan, the officials are given a script to read to the bewildered public, explaining that these arrests are not a royal land grab, but a painful duty performed for the salvation of the faith. In Paris, the operation is personal. Guillaume de Nogaret himself, the architect of the ruin, leads the raid on the Villeneuve du Temple. Imagine the scene at the Great Gate. The city is just waking up, the air smelling of wood smoke and the river. The Templar sentries see a troop of armed men approaching, flying the royal banner. They do not raise the alarm. Why would they? This is the King's Guard. They are allies. The drawbridge is lowered, not for an enemy, but for a guest. Nogaret rides into the courtyard, his face set like flint. He is followed by a swarm of archers and men-at-arms. The silence of the cloister is shattered by the clatter of hooves and the shouting of orders. Jacques de Molay is likely found in his quarters, perhaps preparing for morning prayers. He is an old man now, in his 60s, and one can only imagine the confusion that washes over him. He sees Nogaret, a man he knows, a man he has dined with, standing there with a warrant for his arrest. The charge is heresy. The shock is total. The Templars are the most formidable fighting force in the world. They could have turned the temple into a slaughterhouse and held out for months. But they do not draw their swords. They are paralysed by the enormity of the accusation and by their own respect for hierarchy. They surrender with a quiet, baffled dignity, believing, tragically, that this is a misunderstanding that will be cleared up by the Pope by lunchtime. But as the shackles are placed on their wrists, the reality begins to bite. They are stripped of their white mantles, the symbol of their honour, and forced into rough tunics. They are no longer knights, they are prisoners. The vaults are sealed, the archives are seized. In a single morning, the accumulated power of 2 centuries is dismantled. It is a decapitation strike of terrifying efficiency. Across France, the scene repeats itself in hundreds of preceptories. Men are dragged from their beds, from their chapels, from their stables. In rural commanderies, old Templars, who have retired to farm sheep, are bewildered to find the local sheriff banging on their door, accusing them of spitting on the cross. Historians and folklorists still argue whether this specific date, Friday the 13th, is the true origin of the superstition that the day is unlucky. It is. While some scholars suggest the superstition is a more modern invention, later grafted onto the Templar story, the resonance is undeniable. For the Templars, It was certainly the unluckiest day in history. It marks the moment the world turned upside down. The protectors became the prey. The bankers became the bankrupt. By noon, the dungeons of France are full. In Paris, the king moves quickly to control the narrative. He does not hide the arrests. He broadcasts them. He assembles the masters of the University of Paris, the intellectual elite of Europe, and the canons of Notre Dame to explain his actions. He paints a picture of a king weeping for the corruption of his favourite sons. The faith is in danger, his criers shout in the streets. The temple is a den of vipers. The public is stunned. The Templars were not loved. They were too rich and too arrogant for that, but they were respected. To hear that they were secret devil worshippers is a shock that destabilises the medieval worldview. It is like waking up to hear that the Red Cross has been a front for a terrorist cell. The psychological impact on the imprisoned knights is immediate and devastating. They are separated from one another. The solidarity of the brotherhood, their greatest strength, is broken. A knight is thrown into a dark cell alone. He does not know what is happening to his brothers. He does not know if the Pope knows. He is left in the dark, literally and metaphorically, to stew in his own fear. And the king's men are clever. They tell the prisoners nothing. They let the silence do the work. They let the knights imagine the worst. In the royal palace, Philip is calm. The first phase is a complete success. There has been no uprising, no civil war. The Pope has been presented with a fait accompli. Clement V is furious, of course. His jurisdiction has been trampled, his orders ignored. But what can he do? The Templars are already in chains. The gold is already under royal guard. Philip sends a letter to the other monarchs of Europe, Edward II of England, James II of Aragon, urging them to follow his example and arrest the Templars in their lands. He writes with the fervour of a convert, claiming that the voice of the turtle dove has been heard in our land, a biblical reference implying that the truth is finally singing out. But the other kings are sceptical. Edward II, who is actually married to Philip's daughter, initially refuses, calling the charges incredible. He writes back, saying the Templars in England are men of good repute. But Philip has momentum. He has the confessions of the spies. He has the moral high ground, or at least the stage-managed illusion of it. He knows that eventually the other kings will fold, especially when they realise that arresting the Templars means seizing their assets. Greed is a universal language. As the sun sets on that fateful Friday, the Villeneuve-du-Temple is a ghost town. The torches are extinguished. The chant of the evening office is silenced. The great fortress stands dark against the Paris sky, a hollow shell. Inside the prisons of the city, the Châtelet, the temple dungeons themselves, hundreds of men are sitting on cold stone floors. They are hungry, confused, and terrified. They're waiting for the morning, hoping for a lawyer, a priest, or a word from the Grand Master. They do not know that the morning will not bring help, it will bring the inquisitors. The arrest was the surgical strike. Now begins the butchery. The king has the bodies. Now he needs the souls. He needs them to say the words that will justify his theft. He needs them to confess. And as we shall see, the men of the Middle Ages had perfected the art of making a man say anything, provided you had enough fire and enough iron. The silence of the isolation cells is broken now, not by the ringing of bells or the chanting of psalms, but by the turning of keys and the heavy tread of the inquisitors. We descend deeper into the nightmare, moving from the shock of arrest to the systematic dismantling of the human spirit. The year is still 1307, the weeks immediately following that fateful Friday. The location is the bowels of the temple itself and other royal prisons across Paris. The king has the men, Now he requires the paperwork of guilt. To get it, he unleashes a force that the Templars, for all their martial prowess, are utterly ill-equipped to fight. The Inquisition of France, led by the king's own confessor, Guillaume de Paris. It is crucial to understand the psychology of the men sitting in these cells. They are soldiers. They are trained to endure the cut of a sword, the impact of a lance, the scorching thirst of the desert. If they were on a battlefield, surrounded by Saracens, they would fight to the death without blinking, but they are not on a battlefield. They are stripped of their armour, their brothers, and their dignity. They are chained in the dark, starved and subjected to a pain that has no honour in it. The torture they face is not the clean violence of war. It is a slow, clinical violation designed to produce a specific result. The Inquisitors do not want the truth, they want the script. They have the list of charges drawn up by Nogaret, spitting on the cross, the obscene kisses, the idol worship, and they simply need the prisoner to say yes to each item. The methods used are horrific, yet they are applied with a chilling bureaucratic detachment. We know from the records that the question, as torture was euphemistically called, took many forms. There is the strapado, where a man's hands are tied behind his back and he is hoisted into the air by his wrists, dislocating the shoulders and leaving him hanging in agony. There is the torture of fire, where the feet are greased with fat and held before a burning brazier until the flesh cooks and the bones are charred. One Templar later testified that his feet were so burnt he could show the bone to the judges, and perhaps most effective of all against men of discipline, starvation and sleeplessness, the mind, deprived of food and rest, begins to fracture. Reality blurs. The prisoner will say anything, agree to anything, just to make the world stop spinning. Under this pressure, the order breaks. It is a collapse of tragic proportions. On October 24th, just 11 days after the arrest, Jacques de Molay himself is brought before the Inquisitors. The Grand Master, the successor of Hugues de Payan, the man who held the banner at Acre, cracks. He confesses. He admits to denying Christ and spitting on the cross during his initiation, though he vehemently denies the charges of sodomy. Why did he do it? Historians still argue furiously over this moment. Was he tortured physically, or was he broken psychologically, told that his brothers had already confessed, told that the Pope had abandoned him, told that confession was the only path to mercy? Or perhaps he was simply an old, confused man who thought that a partial confession would satisfy the king and save the order from total destruction. Whatever the reason, his confession is a catastrophe. It validates the king's lies. If the Grand Master admits it, who can deny it? Following his lead, the rank and file begin to crumble. In Paris, out of 138 Templars questioned, 134 confess to at least some of the charges. The uniformity of the confessions is suspicious to modern eyes, and should have been to medieval ones. They all tell the same story, using the same phrases, often matching the wording of the arrest warrant exactly. It is the hallmark of a coerced narrative, yet amidst the sea of yeses, there are tragic variations. Some knights, weeping, claim they spat near the cross, not on it. Others claim they denied Christ only with their mouths, not with their hearts, because the Grand Master commanded it. They are trying to reconcile their obedience to the order with their obedience to God, a mental gymnastics that leaves them shattered. Central to these interrogations is the mystery of the idol. The Inquisitors are obsessed with it. They ask every knight, "Did you see the head?" The answers are a chaotic mess of contradictions, which ironically points to the fact that no such idol existed. Some knights describe a bearded head made of gold. Others say it was made of wood. Some say it had 3 faces. Others say it was a skull. Some claim it was the head of a cat. This idol is often referred to in popular culture as Baphomet, a name that appears in some of the trial transcripts. Scholars debate the origin of this word endlessly. Some argue it is a corruption of Muhammad, reflecting a medieval misconception that Muslims were idolaters. Others suggest it is a code, a cipher, but the most likely historical truth is that the head was a twisted interpretation of the Templars' actual relic collection. They possessed reliquaries, silver or gold busts containing the skull fragments of saints like Saint Euphemia or one of the 11,000 virgins of Cologne. To a suspicious mind, a knight bowing before a silver reliquary in a candle-lit chapel could easily be twisted into idol worship. The toll of this process is physical as well as moral. In Paris alone, 36 Templars died during the interrogations. They are not executed. They simply expire from the trauma, the infection of their wounds, or the sheer shock of their treatment. Their bodies are disposed of quietly. The king does not want martyrs. He wants penitents. He wants broken men who will stand on a platform and tell the people of Paris that the king was right all along. The tragedy reaches a surreal peak when the king invites the masters of the university to hear the confessions. The Templars, haggard, limping, eyes hollowed by days of darkness, are paraded out. They repeat their lies. Yes, I spat. Yes, I denied. They look at the floor, unable to meet the eyes of the crowd. It is a show trial, in the truest sense. The public, seeing these once proud warriors reduced to trembling wrecks, is horrified but convinced. The sheer magnitude of the confession, surely they wouldn't all lie, overwhelms the critical faculties of the observer. But we must look closer at the few who did not break, or who broke and then tried to fight back. There are whispers of resistance. Some knights, despite the pain, refuse to confess to the sexual charges, clinging to that last shred of their dignity. But the machinery is too strong. The Inquisition records the answers they want to hear. If a knight stays silent, it is taken as stubbornness. If he speaks, his words are twisted. The scribe is the most dangerous man in the room. As the weeks drag into winter, the Order of the Temple is effectively dead in France. Its leaders are discredited, its treasury is in the king's hands, and its members are branded as heretics. But the story is not over. The king has won the opening battle, but he has overplayed his hand. He has trampled on the authority of the Pope. Clement d'Aibchar, sitting in Avignon, is reading the reports with growing alarm. He sees that Philip is not just purging a religious order, he is usurping the power of the church. The Pope realizes that if he allows a king to judge a religious order, he renders the papacy irrelevant. The section closes with a shift in the wind. The initial shock of the torture chambers is fading, replaced by a dull, aching reality. The prisoners are returned to their cells, nursing their crushed limbs and their crushed souls. They have said the words. They have dishonoured themselves to stop the pain. But in the silence that follows the screams, a new feeling begins to stir in some of them. Shame. And from shame, eventually, comes anger. The king thinks he has broken them forever, but he has forgotten that these men were once the lions of Christendom. The fire that burned in them at Acre is not completely extinguished, it is merely smothered under a blanket of fear. And deep in the south, and in the halls of the papal palace, the question is finally being asked, is any of this actually true? The torture has produced a mountain of paper, but it has not produced a single grain of truth. The dungeon's cold truth turns out to be no truth at all, only the reflection of the king's own dark desire. We leave the suffocating darkness of the Parisian dungeons now, travelling south to a place that should be a sanctuary of light, the papal court. The year is 1300. We find ourselves not in the eternal grandeur of Rome, but in the lush provincial city of Poitiers. And later, the growing shadow of Avignon. The papacy is on the move, drifting untethered from its Italian roots, caught in the gravitational pull of the French crown. Sitting on the throne of St. Peter is Clément Assaïf, born Bertrand de Gaulle. He is a man of profound contradictions, intelligent, legally brilliant, but physically frail and politically compromised. If Philip the Fair is the granite statue of our story, Clement is the willow tree, bending, twisting, desperate not to break in the storm. Clement is suffering. History tells us he was plagued by a chronic, agonizing stomach ailment, likely cancer or severe ulcers, that left him bedridden for days, surviving on a diet of crushed emeralds, a very expensive, very ineffective medieval smoothie, and warm milk. He is a man who just wants a quiet life and a unified church. Instead, he has been handed a nightmare. The news of the Templar arrests has reached him not as a request for permission, but as a done deal. Philip has effectively walked onto the Pope's lawn and arrested his gardeners. It is a staggering breach of canon law. The Templars answer only to the Pope. By arresting them, Philip has not just attacked a military order, he has attacked the sovereignty of the Holy See. For a brief shining moment, Clement finds his backbone. He is furious. He realizes that if a king can arrest the Pope's direct subordinates on a whim, the papacy is meaningless. He fires off a letter to Philip that fairly blisters with indignation, or at least as much indignation as a diplomat can muster. He writes, "You have laid your hand upon the persons and property of the Templars, in contempt of us and the Roman Church." He takes a drastic step. He suspends the Inquisition in France. He orders the bishops to stop their proceedings. He demands that the prisoners and their property be handed over to the Church immediately. For a few weeks in early 1308, it looks like the Templars might actually be saved by the red tape of the Vatican. But Philip is not a man who stops for red tape. He cuts it with a sword. He launches a propaganda war against the Pope that is shockingly modern in its viciousness. He unleashes his lawyers and his pamphleteers. They begin to whisper that perhaps the Pope is protecting the Templars because he likes the heretics. Maybe the Pope has been bribed. Maybe the Pope is not a true Christian. Philip even threatens to exhume the body of Clement's predecessor, Pope Boniface VIII, and put his corpse on trial for heresy, a grotesque threat that terrifies Clement, who knows that such a trial would tear the Church apart. It is a high-stakes game of chicken. Philip is betting that Clement fears a schism more than he loves the Templars. He is right. Caught between his conscience and his crown, Clement tries to stall. He announces that he will personally interview the Templars. He wants to hear the truth from their own lips, away from the king's torture chambers. He summons the leaders, Jacques de Molay and the other high officers, to come to him in Poitiers. This is the critical juncture. If Molay can stand before the Pope and show his scars, show the burns on his feet, and explain that his confession was ripped from him by agony, the king's case will collapse. The king knows this, and so the king plays a dirty logistical card. Philip sends a message to the Pope. "We would love to send the Grand Master to you. Really we would, but sadly he is too sick to travel." It is a lie, as transparent as glass. But in the diplomatic dance of the Middle Ages, it serves as a brick wall. The king claims that the roads are bad, the prisoners are frail, and the journey is impossible. Instead of the leaders, the king sends a carefully curated selection of 72 rank-and-file Templars to Poitiers. These are men who have been broken, coached, and promised freedom if they stick to the script. They stand before the Pope and repeat the lies, the spitting, the kisses, the idol. Clement listens, distressed and overwhelmed. He is a lawyer, and he can smell the coercion, but the sheer volume of the testimony weighs on him. However, In the midst of this charade, something extraordinary happens. In the privacy of the papal audience, freed briefly from the king's immediate glare, some of the Templars begin to go off script. They show their wounds. They weep. They hint at the terror that made them speak. Clement begins to see the cracks in the king's pottery. He realizes that the confessions are fruit of the poison tree. Historians still argue whether Clement privately believed the Templars were innocent, or if he thought they had merely lost their way and become corrupt, but it is clear he did not believe they were devil worshippers. He saw them as fallen monks, not antichrists. He wanted to reform the order, not burn it. The summer of 1308 becomes a summer of negotiation. The Pope and the King meet in Poitiers. It is a tense family reunion. Philip arrives with his army, a subtle reminder that he has more swords than the Pope has prayers. They talk for days. The king pressures Clement to declare the Templars heretics immediately. Clement refuses. He is stalling, looking for a third way. He proposes that the order's guilt be determined by a general council of the Church to be held in the future. It is a classic bureaucratic delay tactic. When in doubt, form a committee. But Philip extracts a fatal concession. In exchange for the Pope taking over the investigation, the king is allowed to keep guardianship of the Templars' bodies and their property. It is a disaster. The Church technically has jurisdiction, but the king has the keys to the cells. It is like giving a fox custody of the henhouse while the farmer forms a committee to discuss poultry safety. This compromise seals the fate of the order. The Templars remain in royal prisons, subject to royal jailers, eating royal bread, which was likely stale, and hearing royal whispers that they will burn if they retract their confessions. As the year drags on, Clement V retreats further into the shadows of his own indecision. He is a tragic figure, really, a man who knows what is right but lacks the strength to enforce it. He is trying to save the furniture of the church while the house is burning down. He spends his days in legal manoeuvring, drafting bulls with names like Faciens Misericordiam, granting mercy, which sounds hopeful but effectively sets up the commissions that will dismantle the order. He is trying to be a judge, but he is acting like an undertaker. There is a moment of dark absurdity in the records where Clement complains about the cost of the proceedings. The paperwork generated by the Templar trials is astronomical. Thousands of rolls of parchment, gallons of ink. The bureaucracy of destruction is expensive. The Pope and the King actually argue over who should pay for the food of the imprisoned Templars. The King says the Church should pay, since they are now Church prisoners. The Pope says the King should pay, since he has all their money. Meanwhile, the knights in their cells are likely sharing a single rat between three of them. We must also touch on the chignon problem, which looms on the horizon. Clement, still desperate to hear from the leaders, decides to send three of his most trusted cardinals to the castle of Chignon, where Jacques de Molay and the other officers are being held. This is his last-ditch effort to bypass the king's blockade. He gives the cardinals secret powers to absolve the Templars if they show true repentance. It is a covert operation, a spiritual extraction mission. The Pope is trying to sneak forgiveness to the prisoners under the king's nose. As the section closes, imagine Pope Clement V standing on the balcony of his residence in Poitiers. He is wrapped in furs against the chill, his face gaunt from illness. He looks north, toward Paris, where the Iron King sits on a throne of stolen gold. Clement knows he has been outmaneuvered. He has saved the church from schism, yes. He has kept his tiara, but the price is the blood of the Templars. He washes his hands, pilot-like, in the basin of canon law. He tells himself he is doing his duty, following the process, waiting for the council. But deep down, in the quiet of his prayers, he must hear the rattling of the chains. He is the vicar of Christ, the shepherd of the flock, and he has just agreed to let the wolves manage the sheep pen. The darkness of the dungeon has not lifted. It has merely expanded to cover the Vatican. The Pope has stepped into the shadows, and he will never truly find his way back to the light. We travel now to the banks of the Vienne River, where the grey, imposing silhouette of Chinon Castle cuts a jagged line against the summer sky of 1308. This is a place heavy with the ghosts of kings. It is where Henry II of England died, cursing his sons, and where Richard the Lionheart breathed his last. Now it serves as a high-security prison for the most valuable hostages in Christendom, the Grand Master Jacques de Molay, and 4 other high-ranking officers of the Temple. The air here is thick with humidity and despair. The leaders have been separated from the rank and file, isolated in the donjon, waiting for a verdict that feels increasingly like a foregone conclusion. But in the dogged days of August, the drawbridge lowers to admit 3 visitors who bring with them a glimmer of hope, or at least the rustle of due process. They are 3 cardinals sent by Pope Clément XVI, Bérenger Frédol, Etienne de Suissy, and Landolfo Brancacci. They are the Pope's eyes and ears, men of the cloth, who are also sharp legal minds, sent on a mission of extreme delicacy. Their task is to bypass the king's interference and find out, once and for all, the state of the Grand Master's soul. The events that unfold in the cool, stoned solar of Chinon Castle from August 17th to the 20th constitute one of the great what-ifs of history, a turning point that turned into a dead end due to a clerical error. For centuries, the world believed that the Templar leadership remained condemned heretics, abandoned by the Church. But the truth was hidden in a piece of sheepskin that would not be found for nearly 700 years. The cardinals sit behind a heavy oak table, their red robes providing a splash of colour in the drab grey of the prison. One by one, the prisoners are brought in. They are unchained for the interview, a small mercy. Jacques de Molay enters first. He looks older than his years, his face lined with the stress of the last 10 months, his beard long and unkempt. He is a man who has led armies, but he has no defence against the weapon currently pointed at him, the question of heresy. The interrogation here is different from the torture chambers of Paris. There are no strappado ropes, no burning coals. There is only the scratching of the notary's quill and the quiet questions of the cardinals. They ask him about the initiation. Did he spit on the cross? Did he deny Christ? Molay, perhaps sensing that this is his last chance for spiritual survival, speaks with a candid, desperate honesty. He admits that yes, during his own initiation decades ago, he was asked to deny Christ and spit near the cross, but he insists, with tears in his eyes, that he spat on the ground, not on the figure of Jesus. He explains, or tries to, that it was a test of obedience, a stupid rough soldier's tradition designed to see if a recruit would follow orders no matter how repulsive. It was not a rejection of God. It was a hazing ritual gone wrong. He vehemently denies the charges of sodomy and idol worship. He begs for mercy. He asks to be reconciled with the Church. The other leaders, Hugues de Pyrot, Geoffroy de Gonneville, tell similar stories. They admit to the foolishness, the roughness, the military games that looked so damnable to priestly eyes, but they deny being heretics. They are men confessing to bad behaviour, not bad theology. And here is the shock: the cardinals believe them. They determine that while the Templars are guilty of indecency, blasphemy, and gross stupidity, they are not heretics. They are not secret Muslims or devil worshippers. They are just rough men who lost their way. In a moment that should have saved the order, the cardinals grant them absolution. They perform the rite of reconciliation. They formally welcome Jacques de Molay and his brothers back into the sacraments of the Church. Technically, spiritually, they are saved. They are no longer excommunicated. The cardinals have the notary draw up a precise record of this absolution. It is a large document, written on fine parchment, detailing the testimonies and the Pope's forgiveness. This is the famous Chinon parchment. It is the smoking gun of Templar innocence. The cardinals pack it up, seal it, and send it back to the papal archives. And then, tragedy strikes. Not with a sword, but with a filing cabinet. The document disappears. It is not destroyed. It is simply misfiled. Whether by genuine incompetence, the Vatican archives are vast, and let's be honest, we've all lost a receipt we really needed, or by the quiet intervention of the King's agents, the parchment is catalogued in the wrong box. It slides into a sheaf of unimportant papers, lost in the ocean of Vatican bureaucracy. Because the document vanishes, the King is able to continue his narrative. He ignores the absolution. He claims the Templars are still unrepentant heretics. The Pope, perhaps lacking the physical copy to wave in Philip's face, or perhaps too terrified to use it, lets the moment pass. The history books are written without this crucial chapter. For 7 centuries, historians argue about whether the Pope believed they were guilty. It is only in September 2001 that an Italian paleographer named Barbara Frall, digging through the secret archives for something else entirely, stumbles upon a document with a reference number that doesn't quite match the index. She pulls it out. She reads the Latin. And there, staring back at her from the year 1308, is the absolution of Jacques de Molay. It was a discovery that rewrote the history of the trial, proving that the Church had explicitly found the Templars innocent of heresy before throwing them to the wolves. But back in 1308, inside the walls of Chinon, the prisoners do not know that their lifeline has been cut by a clerk in a dusty room. They feel a sense of relief. They have confessed. They have been forgiven. They likely believe that the worst is over. They imagine that they will be punished, certainly, perhaps sent to monasteries to pray out their days in penance, but they will not burn. They eat their meagre rations with a lighter heart. They do not realize that the King of France operates on a different set of laws than the Church. To Philip, absolution is irrelevant if it doesn't come with confiscation. The King needs the Templars to be destroyed completely, legally and physically, so that the crown can claim their assets without challenge. A reformed order of penitent knights is of no use to him. He needs a dead order of heretics. The atmosphere in Chinon settles back into a heavy, waiting silence. The cardinals depart, their horses kicking up dust on the road to Poitiers. They believe they have done their job. They have saved the souls of the men, even if they cannot save their bodies. They leave behind 5 men who are now effectively pawns in a game they no longer understand. The tragedy of Chinon is the tragedy of bureaucratic silence. It is the story of how a piece of paper could have stopped a bonfire had it only been in the right box. It is a reminder that history is not just made by battles and treaties, but by the fragility of memory and the organisation of archives. Historians still debate the test that Molay described. Was this spitting ritual a remnant of Peter acting as a denier of Christ before the rooster crowed? Was it a simulation of being captured by Saracens, a drill to teach knights how to deceive the enemy while keeping the faith in their hearts? Or was it, as some darker theories suggest, a sign of Gnostic influence, a rejection of the physical cross in favour of a spiritual one? The Chinon parchment suggests the Pope saw it as a corruption of discipline rather than a corruption of faith. It was a barracks vice, a toxic tradition that had festered in the secrecy of the chapter, but it was not devil worship. It was the kind of thing that happens when men live in isolation for too long without supervision, like a frat house that has lost its charter but kept its rituals. As the autumn winds begin to strip the leaves from the vineyards around Chinon, the window of opportunity closes. The king, sensing that the Pope is wavering, ramps up the pressure. He ignores the proceedings at Chinon. He pushes for the public inquiry to resume in Paris, where his men control the dungeon keys. The hope that flickered in the solar of Chinon is extinguished, not by a refusal of mercy, but by the silence of a hidden truth. Jacques de Molay sits in his tower, absolved by God's vicar, but condemned by his king, holding on to a forgiveness that the world will not know about for another 700 years. He waits for the news that he is free. It never comes. The story returns to Paris, leaping forward to the spring of 1310, where a strange and fragile flower begins to bloom in the midst of the ashes. Hope. The Papal Commission, finally established to investigate the guilt of the order as a whole, sets up its tribunal in the episcopal palace. Unlike the king's torture chambers, this feels almost like a court of law. The commissioners are churchmen, not executioners. They ask for defenders. They ask if any brother wishes to speak for the temple. And to the shock of the king's prosecutors, the men in the dungeons answer. They do not shuffle in with heads bowed this time. They stand up, led by two articulate and courageous priests, Peter of Bologna and Renaud de Provins. The defence begins to organise. It is a moment of breathtaking bravery. These men, who have been starved, beaten and terrified for nearly 3 years, suddenly find their voices. They begin to file into the hearing room, not in ones or twos, but in droves. Soon, nearly 600 Templars pledge to defend the order. They retracted their previous confessions, crying out that they only admitted to heresy because of the terror of the fire and the pain of the rack. They strip off their shirts to show the commissioners the scars of the torture, the twisted limbs, the burn marks on their feet. It is a visual testimony that screams louder than any legal argument. Peter of Bologna, a trained lawyer, becomes the voice of this desperate army. He argues with a clarity that rattles the royal agents. He points out the absurdity of the charges. Why would a wealthy, pious order suddenly decide to worship a cat or spit on the cross? He argues that the confessions were extracted by force and are therefore legally void. He demands that the accusers, the men who whispered the lies, be brought out to face them. Of course, the accusers are nowhere to be found. For a few weeks in May 1310, it looks as if the Templars might actually win. The sheer volume of the retractions is overwhelming the prosecution's narrative. The commissioners are listening, the public is watching. If the order can prove that the confessions were all lies, the king's case falls apart. Philip IV is watching this legal resurrection with cold fury. He sees that he has made a tactical error by allowing the Pope's commission to operate freely. He realizes that a fair trial will result in an acquittal, and Philip does not do acquittals. The king's counter-move is a masterclass in judicial brutality. He cannot control the papal commission, but he controls the French church hierarchy. He arranges for the appointment of a new Archbishop of Sens, a man named Philippe de Marigny. It is no coincidence that this new Archbishop is the brother of Enguerrand de Marigny, the king's right-hand man and chief financial advisor. The fix is in. The new Archbishop claims jurisdiction over the individual Templars in his province. He moves with terrifying speed. He does not need a trial. He needs a bonfire. He utilizes a ruthless loophole in canon law regarding relapsed heretics. The logic is twisted but lethal. A heretic who confesses and repents can be saved, imprisoned for life. But a heretic who confesses, repents, and then retracts that confession is considered relapsed, a backslider who has returned to his vomit, the punishment for a relapsed heretic is automatic death by fire. By defending themselves by saying, "I am innocent," the Templars are technically retracting their confessions. Therefore, according to the Archbishop's logic, they are relapsed heretics. It is a legal trap from which there is no escape. Silence means guilt, and defence means death. On the morning of May 12, 1310, the Archbishop pronounces the sentence. 54 Templars, men who had volunteered to defend the order, are condemned to burn. The speed of the execution is intended to shock. That very afternoon, carts are loaded with the condemned men. They are driven out of Paris to a field near the convent of Saint Antoine. The air is sweet with the scent of mayflowers, a cruel contrast to the piles of wood waiting for them. A vast crowd gathers. They expect to see men begging for mercy, weeping, perhaps recanting again to save their lives. But the 54 do not beg. As they are chained to the stakes, a strange calm descends upon them. They have found their courage again. They are knights of the temple once more. As the fires are lit, they do not scream curses. They sing. Through the smoke and the crackle of the flames, the sound of the Salva Regina and the Te Deum rises into the spring sky. They proclaim their innocence until the flames take their voices. The crowd watches in stunned silence. These men die not as heretics, but as martyrs. There is no devil worship here, only a terrifying raw faith that shames the men lighting the torches. Even the royal officials are shaken. One chronicler notes that the spectators wept, confused by how men guilty of such crimes could die with such holiness. The effect of this mass execution on the remaining defence is immediate and catastrophic. The message has been sent: defend the order and you will burn. The next day, Peter of Bologna vanishes. Historians still argue over his fate. Some say he was murdered in prison, others that he escaped, but he is never seen again. Without their leader, and with the smell of their brothers' burning flesh still hanging over the city, the resistance collapses. The other Templars, terrified, withdraw their offers of defence. They return to silence. The papal commission continues its work, but the spirit has gone out of it. The witnesses are now terrified men who mumble whatever the inquisitors want to hear, desperate to avoid the stake. Philip has won, but the victory is stained with a darkness that will never wash off. He has not just defeated an enemy, he has perverted the very concept of justice. He has shown that the law is merely a weapon of the state. The defence of the 54 remains one of the most tragic chapters in legal history, a moment when men stood up for the truth and were incinerated for it. As the smoke drifts away from the fields of Saint Antoine, the silence returns to the dungeons. It is the silence of the grave. The order is not just defeated now, it is broken. The king has proved that he can burn the truth as easily as he burns the bodies. The path is now clear for the final act, the official administrative burial of the temple, which will take place not in a field of fire, but in a quiet cathedral hall with the stroke of a pen. We drift now from the scorched fields of Paris to the ancient mist-shrouded city of Vienne, resting in the valley of the Rhone. The year is 1311. The air here is damp and heavy, carrying the scent of the river and the smoke of 1,000 chimneys. The city is bursting at the seams. It is hosting the Council of Vienne, the grand ecclesiastical assembly summoned by Pope Clement XIV to settle the Templar matter once and for all. The streets are clogged with the retinues of cardinals, archbishops, and patriarchs from as far away as Alexandria and Antioch. It is a gathering of the finest robes and sharpest minds in Christendom, all packed into a city too small to hold them. The atmosphere is not one of holy celebration, but of nervous exhaustion. The shadow of the King of France stretches long across the Alps, darkening the mood of every session. Pope Clement sits in the Cathedral of Saint Maurice, a man visibly eaten away by stress and his mysterious stomach ailment. He has summoned this council to give the dissolution of the Templars a veneer of legality, a stamp of universal church approval. He expects a rubber stamp. But he is met with a surprise, a conscience. When the council convenes in October, the majority of the gathered prelates, Italian, Spanish, English, and German bishops, refuse to simply condemn the order without a hearing. They argue, with a stubbornness that must have given Clement an ulcer, that it is against natural law to condemn a defendant who has not been allowed to speak. They want to hear the defence. 7 Templars actually appear at the council, presenting themselves as representatives of thousands of brothers hiding in the mountains around Lyon, ready to testify to the order's innocence. Panic ripples through the papal entourage. If the Templars speak, if they tell the council about the torture, the starvation, and the coerced confessions, the entire narrative built by the French king will collapse. Clement XIV is trapped. He knows the bishops are right, legally and morally, but he also knows that King Philip is marching toward Vienne. The king is not coming alone. He is bringing an army, ostensibly to protect the council, but in reality to hold a sword to its throat. It is the ultimate pressure tactic. Clement orders the 7 brave Templars to be thrown in prison, effectively silencing the defence before it can begin. He then shuts down the debate. The council sits in an uncomfortable limbo through the freezing winter of 1311, 1312, waiting for the king to arrive. On March 20th, 1312, Philip enters Vienne. He rides through the city gates with the silent menace that is his trademark, flanked by his sons and his iron-clad knights. He does not storm the cathedral. He simply takes up residence and lets his presence do the work. He demands the abolition of the order. He does not care how it is done, as long as it is done. Clement, looking at the king's army and then at his own rebellious bishops, finds a loophole, a third way that avoids a trial but gives the king what he wants. On April 3rd, 1312, the full council gathers for the second solemn session. The cathedral is packed. The King of France sits on a throne to the right of the Pope. The tension is so thick it feels like a physical weight. Clement V rises. He does not ask for a vote. Instead, a clerk reads aloud the papal bull Vox in excelso, a voice from on high. It is a masterpiece of evasion. The bull admits that the evidence against the Templars is not definitive. It admits that a legal condemnation is not strictly supported by the proceedings. However, Clement argues, the reputation of the order is so ruined, the scandal so great, that it can no longer function effectively. Therefore, he dissolves the order not by definitive sentence, a judicial finding of guilt, but by apostolic provision, an administrative executive order. It is a firing, not a conviction. The Pope effectively says, we aren't saying you are guilty, but you can't work here anymore. To ensure there is no protest, Clement adds a terrifying postscript to the reading. Any bishop who speaks a word without permission will be excommunicated. The silence of Vienne is absolute. The hundreds of gathered churchmen sit mute, listening to the death knell of the Templars, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The Order of the Temple, which had defended the Holy Land for 2 centuries, is extinguished by a lawyer's trick in a quiet room. But if the dissolution is the funeral, the fight over the inheritance is the wake. The Templars were arguably the wealthiest organisation in the world. Who gets the gold? Philip, of course, wants it all. He claims the order owes him vast sums for the costs of the imprisonment and the defence of the faith. But here, Clement V finally draws a line in the sand. In a separate bull, ad providam, he decrees that the property of the Templars is given to the Knights Hospitaller, the Templars' eternal rivals. It is a logical move, keeping the money dedicated to the crusade, but it infuriates the king. However, the reality of the transfer is far messier than the parchment suggests. While the Hospitallers technically inherit the estates, the king presents them with a bill that would make a modern accountant weep. He charges them for the years of custody of the Templars, for the legal fees, for the food, for the ropes used to bind them. By the time the Hospitallers pay off the French crown to release the properties, a huge portion of the Templar wealth has effectively migrated into the royal treasury. In other countries, the fate of the property varies. In Spain and Portugal, the kings simply rebrand the Templars under new names. The Order of Christ in Portugal, for instance, allowing the knights and their assets to continue almost undisturbed, a quiet admission that the heresy charges were nonsense. But in France, the looting is total. Historians still argue about Clement's legacy here. Was he a coward who sacrificed the Templars to save himself, or was he a pragmatist who realized that if he didn't sacrifice the order, Philip might destroy the entire church? By dissolving the order administratively, Clement avoided setting a precedent that a king could force the church to condemn innocent men as heretics. He saved the principle of church law by violating the reality of it. It is a cold, hollow victory. The voice from on high turned out to be a whisper of compromise. As the council winds down in May 1312, the city of Vienne empties. The king returns to Paris, his wagons heavier with silver. The bishops return to their dioceses, likely feeling a deep, nagging shame. The Templar Order is no more. It has been erased from the roster of the church. But the human debris remains. Thousands of Templars are still in prison. What happens to them? The bull decides their fate too. Those who confessed are to be pensioned off to live in monasteries. Those who did not are to be kept in perpetual harsh imprisonment. And the leaders, Jacques de Molay and his 3 lieutenants, are reserved for the Pope's personal judgment. They remain in the dungeons, waiting for a final sentence that is taking years to arrive. There is a profound melancholy to this moment. The Templars were created in the fire of crusade, amidst the clashing of swords and the shouting of Deus Vult. They end not with a bang, but with the scratching of a quill and the shuffling of feet in a cathedral. The institution is gone, stripped for parts like a captured ship, but institutions are made of men, and the drama of the Templars has one final, explosive act left to play. The paperwork is finished, but the tragedy is not. As Clement leaves Vienne, perhaps he thinks he has buried the ghost of the temple. He is wrong. Ghosts have a way of lingering, especially when they have been silenced rather than satisfied. The silence of Vienne is not a peace, it is a pause. The ledger is closed, but the bill has not yet been paid by the men who signed it. The calendar turns one final time, settling on the 18th of March, 1314. 2 years have passed since the quiet dissolution at Vienne, years of silence where the world moved on, while 4 old men rotted in the dark. We find ourselves in Paris, on a wooden scaffold erected in the Parvis, the square before the Cathedral of Notre Dame. The day is crisp, the sky a pale, indifferent blue. A massive crowd has gathered, a sea of woolen hoods and upturned faces jostling for a view. They have come to witness the final act of the great Templar drama, the public sentencing of the Grand Master Jacques de Molay and his 3 lieutenants, Geoffroy de Charnay, Hugues de Peyraud, and Geoffroy de Gonville. The stage is set for a piece of carefully choreographed political theatre. 3 cardinals representing the Pope sit on a raised dais, resplendent in their scarlet robes, looking like bright bloodstains against the grey stone of the cathedral. Their job today is simple. The heavy lifting has been done. The order is dead. The property is theoretically distributed. The guilt has been established. All that remains is for these 4 broken men to stand before the people, repeat their confessions one last time, and receive their sentence of perpetual imprisonment, a life sentence to be served in a monastery or a dungeon, so out of sight, out of mind. It is intended to be a closure event, a tidying up of loose ends. The script has been written, rehearsed, and agreed upon, but no one gave Jacques de Molay the final draft. The prisoners are led up to the platform. They are shadows of the warriors they once were. 7 years of dungeon darkness have bleached the colour from their skin. Their beards are long and matted, their bodies gaunt from a diet of bread and water. They blink in the bright spring sunlight, looking frail and harmless. The crowd quiets. The cardinals read out the crimes: heresy, idolatry, the usual list of nightmares. Then they turn to the prisoners and ask them to confirm their confessions for the record. Hugues de Peyraud and Geoffroy de Gonville do exactly what is expected of them. They nod, they mumble their assent. They are broken men, perhaps hoping for a warm cell and a soft bed, or perhaps just too tired to fight. They accept their fate with the resignation of the defeated. Then it is Jacques de Molay's turn. The Grand Master steps forward. The Cardinal waits for the yes, but Molay does not say yes. Instead, he straightens his back. For the first time in 7 years, the old soldier who fought at Acre, the man who carried the burdens of Christendom, returns. He raises his voice, and it is not a whisper, it is a roar that carries across the square. "I think it is only right," he declares, his voice shaking with emotion, "that at so solemn a moment, when my life has so little time to run, I should reveal the deception which has been practiced and speak up for the truth." The cardinals freeze. The crowd gasps. Molay continues, speaking clearly, so that every Parisian can hear. "I confess that I am indeed guilty of the greatest infamy. But the infamy is that I have lied. I have lied in admitting that the Order is guilty of the charges made against it. I declare, and I must declare, that the Order is innocent. Its purity and saintliness are beyond question." He pauses, looking at the stunned cardinals. "I admitted to these lies only to save my own life, to escape the excessive tortures of the rack. I know well the punishment that awaits those who retract their confessions, but the truth is more important than my life. I will not die with a lie on my lips." Beside him, Geoffroy de Charnay, the preceptor of Normandy, steps up. Inspired by his master's courage, he too recants. He shouts that the Order is pure, that the king is a thief, and that the charges are madness. Chaos erupts on the platform. The cardinals are flabbergasted. This was not in the program. They have no instructions for this. They try to shout the men down, but the damage is done. The crowd is murmuring, the energy shifting from curiosity to shock. The cardinals, panicked, order the men to be taken back to the provost of Paris while they decide what to do. They assume they will have time to consult the Pope, to have a meeting, to figure out a new plan. But King Philip is not a man for meetings. He is at the Louvre Palace, just down the river, when the news reaches him. His reaction is immediate and terrifying. He does not consult the church. He does not summon his lawyers. He is done with law. These men are relapsed heretics. They confessed, and now they have retracted. Under the brutal logic of the Inquisition, the penalty is automatic. There is no trial needed. There is only the fire. Philip orders that they be burned that very evening. As the sun sets, turning the Seine into a ribbon of blood-red light, soldiers escort Molay and Charnay to a small muddy islet in the river called the Ile des Juifs, the island of the Jews, located near the gardens of the royal palace. Today, the tip of the Ile de la Cité, near the Pont Neuf. It is a deliberate choice of location. The king can watch the execution from his own window. A stake has been erected. Faggots of wood and charcoal are piled high. The atmosphere is less like an execution and more like a religious vigil. The crowd that gathers on the banks is silent. There is no jeering. These men are not dying as criminals. They are dying because they refuse to lie. Mole asks to be tied to the stake facing the Cathedral of Notre Dame. He asks for his hands to be left free so he can pray. He strips off his upper garments with a calm dignity, standing in his shirt. He does not tremble. Historical accounts describe his demeanour as so cheerful and resolute that the onlookers are moved to tears. The fire is lit, but this is not a quick end. The order has been given to build a slow fire, using charcoal and damp wood to ensure the heat rises gradually, prolonging the agony. It is a final act of cruelty by a king who hates to be defied. As the flames begin to lick at his legs, Mole does not scream. He prays. He commends his soul to God. And then, according to this eyewitness accounts that will echo through the centuries, he speaks his final words to the men who killed him. Historians still argue about the exact phrasing of the curse. The famous dramatic version, Pope Clement, Chevalier Guillaume, King Philip, I summon you to the tribunal of heaven within a year, appears in later chronicles popularised by writers like Ferretto of Vicenza. However, the contemporary eyewitness Geoffroy de Paris records a hauntingly similar sentiment, if less theatrical. He reports Mole saying, "God knows who is in the wrong and has sinned. Soon a calamity will occur to those who have condemned us to death." Whether it was a specific summons or a general prophetic warning, the effect is the same. The fire climbs higher. The smoke chokes the prayer. The bodies of the last Grand Master and the preceptor of Normandy slump against the chains. It is over. The Templars are dust. But as the embers glow in the Parisian night, a strange phenomenon occurs. The crowd does not disperse in horror. Instead, they wade into the shallow water. They approach the cooling pyre. They are not looting. They are collecting relics. They scoop up the ash, the bits of bone, the charred wood. They touch them to their foreheads. In the eyes of the people of Paris, Jacques de Molay has died a saint. The king has won the legal battle, but he has lost the spiritual war. He burned the bodies to destroy the order, but the fire has only baked the legend into something hard and permanent. Philip watches from his palace window. The fire is out. The nuisance is gone. He has the money. He has the power. He assumes the story ends here. He sleeps soundly, perhaps, believing that no one can summon a king to judgment. But the calendar is ticking. The curse, spoken or unspoken, has been cast, and as the smoke drifts over the Seine, the universe seems to be aligning for a series of deaths so timely, so sudden, and so specific that they will terrify Europe for a generation. The fire on the Seine was meant to be an ending, but it was merely the opening bell of a reckoning. The smoke from the execution on the Ile des Juifs dissipates into the cool spring night, but the words of Jacques de Molay do not vanish. They hang over Paris like a heavy, unseen mist. I summon you. It is a phrase that is whispered in the taverns, muttered by the washerwomen at the river, and debated in the hushed corridors of the university. The medieval mind is deeply attuned to the idea of divine justice. To the common people, the Grand Master's death was not a defeat. It was a legal appeal to the highest court in existence. And as the weeks turn into months, the docket of that celestial court begins to clear with a terrifying speed. The first summons is served, not to the king in his palace, but to the Pope in his retreat. Clement IX is a man running out of time and places to hide. Since the Council of Vienne, His health has collapsed completely. His stomach ailment, likely a stomach cancer or severe intestinal sclerosis, has turned his life into a waking nightmare of pain. He can no longer eat solid food. He is wasting away, a skeleton in velvet robes. Desperate for relief, he decides to travel back to his birthplace in Gascony, hoping the country air might do what his doctors cannot. He never makes it home. On April 20th, 1314, mere weeks after the execution of Jacques de Molay, Clement V dies in the small town of Rocamaure. The death is grim, lacking all the pomp and dignity of a papal passing. According to the chroniclers, the end is messy and agonizing, but the true horror comes after the breath leaves his body. The papal entourage, perhaps fearing the plague or simply looting the treasury, abandons the corpse. For hours the Vicar of Christ lies alone in a cold room. Legends, and some chronicles, say that a thunderstorm rolled in that night, a violent tempest that shook the church where the body lay. A bolt of lightning is said to have struck the building, igniting the draperies. The fire spread to the catafalque, scorching the Pope's body before anyone could extinguish it. When they finally attended to him, they found the body half burnt, a chilling, ironic echo of the fire he had allowed to consume the Templars. Whether the lightning strike is fact or folklore, the timing of his death is indisputable. The first head of the Hydra has fallen, almost exactly 33 days after the Grand Master. In Paris, King Philip receives the news with his usual stony expression. He is not a man to believe in ghosts. He is the Iron King, the master of Europe. He is only 46 years old, in the prime of his life, healthy, vigorous, and powerful. He has crushed the Jews, the Lombards, and the Templars. He has humbled the papacy. What is a curse to a man who has rewritten the laws of God and man to suit his budget? He continues his reign, seemingly untouched. The summer passes. The autumn arrives. The court moves to the chateau of Fontainebleau, the king's birthplace and favourite hunting ground. It is November 1314. The forest of Fontainebleau is a blaze of russet and gold. The air is crisp, perfect hunting weather. Philip rides out with his retinue. He is a skilled horseman, confident in the saddle. What happens next is a scene that history has never quite agreed upon, blurring the line between accident and destiny. Some accounts say he suffered a stroke while riding. Others say a wild boar, the symbol of primal chaotic force, charged his horse. The most dramatic version describes a stag appearing from the brush, wearing a cross between its antlers, a symbol associated with St. Hubert, but twisted here into an omen, causing the king's horse to rear violently. Philip is thrown. He hits the ground hard, crushed under the weight of the animal, or paralysed by an internal hemorrhage. He does not die instantly. He lingers for weeks, paralysed and unable to speak, trapped in his own body. It is a slow, humiliating end for a man who controlled everything. He is transported down the Seine to Poissy. There, on November 29th, 1314, 7 months after the Pope, and well within the year of Molay's execution, Philip the Fair breathes his last. The Iron King is dead. The two architects of the Templar destruction have been swept off the board before the year is out. Even Guillaume de Nogaret, the lawyer who drafted the lies, does not escape the shadow. Though history records his death in 1313, shortly before the final pyre, the popular imagination lumps him into the curse, seeing his early demise, allegedly with his tongue protruding hideously, as the prelude to the main act. But the curse of the Templars is not satisfied with just 2 men. It demands a legacy. At the time of his death, Philip IV seemed to have secured the future of France forever. He had 3 healthy adult sons, Louis, Philip, and Charles. The Capuchin dynasty had produced a male heir in a direct line for over 300 years, the Capuchin miracle. The succession was the most stable thing in Europe. Yet, following the death of the Templars, this miracle turns into a massacre of fortune. Louis VI, the eldest son, known as the Quarrelsome, takes the throne. He dies suddenly after only 18 months, allegedly from drinking chilled wine after a game of tennis, though whispers of poison abound. He leaves behind a pregnant wife and a daughter, whose legitimacy is questioned due to the Tour de Nesle affair, a scandal of adultery that rocked the court just months after the Templar execution. The Queen gives birth to a son, John the Firstborn, who lives for only 5 days. The crown passes to the second brother, Philip V, the Tall. He is capable and intelligent, perhaps the only one who could have saved the dynasty. He rules for 6 years, before dying of dysentery and fever, leaving no male heir. The crown passes to the third and final brother, Charles IV, the Fair. He reigns for 6 years. He dies in 1328, also without a male heir. In the span of 14 years, a blink of an eye in historical terms, the House of Capet, which had ruled France since 987, is extinct in the direct male line. The Iron King's lineage has rusted away completely. The result is a succession crisis that triggers the 100 Years' War between England and France, a conflict that will ravage the kingdom for a century. It is as if the destruction of the Templars broke a seal, unleashing a tide of chaos that drowned the very nation Philip tried to strengthen. The gold he stole was spent on wars that led nowhere. The power he centralized was inherited by no one. Historians still argue whether this cascade of death was mere coincidence. Medieval mortality rates were high, after all, and dysentery does not check for curses, or if it was the result of the stress and guilt that permeated the court. But to the people of the 14th century, there was no argument. The verdict was clear. God had heard the Grand Master. The fire on the Ile des Juifs had been answered by a fire from heaven. By a fire, the Templars were gone, but they had taken the world of their destroyers with them. As we stand at the end of this dynasty, looking at the empty throne of France, a quiet realization settles in. The Templars were not just soldiers. They were a foundational pillar of the medieval order. When Philip knocked that pillar down to steal the gold plated around it, he didn't realize he was bringing the roof down on his own head. The curse was not magic, it was consequence. It was the inevitable recoil of a system pushed beyond its moral breaking point. The story of the Knights Templar has now moved from history into the realm of the afterlife. The bodies are buried, the kings are dead, and the gold is scattered. But there is one final chapter to write it. The Templars do not simply vanish into the history books. They go underground, into the catacombs of our imagination. They transform from a military order into a myth, a secret that refuses to stay buried. As the lights go out in the palaces of the Capetians, a new candle is lit in the minds of poets, conspirators, and dreamers. The Grand Master is dead, but the temple is about to become eternal. The fires of the Ile des Juifs have long since cooled, and the ashes of the Grand Master have been washed into the sea by 7 centuries of rain. Yet we find ourselves standing today in a world that refuses to let the Knights Templar die. We move now into the twilight of our story, where the hard edges of history blur into the soft, shifting shapes of myth. The Order of the Temple was officially destroyed in 1312, erased from the papal registers, its seals broken and its archives scattered. By all the laws of politics and time, they should have become a footnote, a dusty curiosity known only to medievalists and coin collectors. Instead, they performed their greatest trick. They vanished from the battlefield only to reappear in the imagination. The physical order died, but the idea of the Templar, the warrior monk, the keeper of secrets, the guardian of the Grail, became immortal. It began almost immediately. In Portugal, the wily king Dinis, who liked the Templars and found them useful for fighting Moors, simply changed their name. They became the Order of Christ, keeping their castles, their men, and their Red Cross. It was a bureaucratic sleight of hand that allowed the Templars to survive in plain sight. 2 centuries later, ships bearing the Red Cross of the Order of Christ would sail under Prince Henry the Navigator and Vasco da Gama to discover new worlds. In a very real sense, the Templars helped map the globe long after the Pope said they didn't exist. But it is the shadows, not the ships, that capture us. Legends began to whisper of a missing fleet. On the night before the arrests in Paris, it was said that 18 Templar galleys slipped out of the port of La Rochelle, carrying the true treasury and the secret archives. Where did they go? Historians still argue whether this fleet ever existed, dismissing it as wishful thinking. But the Romantics have charted their course to Scotland, to the rugged coast where the excommunicated king Robert the Bruce was fighting for independence. At the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, a mysterious force of heavy cavalry is said to have turned the tide, Templars, rising from the mist to strike one last blow against tyranny. It is a beautiful story, likely untrue, but it planted a seed in the Scottish soil that would bloom centuries later in the stone riddles of Rosslyn Chapel. This small, ornate chapel, dripping with carvings of green men and strange symbols, became the Mecca of Templar mythology, the supposed hiding place of the Holy Grail or the head of Christ. The connection is tenuous, mostly based on the Sinclair family's later associations, but standing in that stone box of mystery, one feels the weight of a silence that wants to speak. This is the ultimate legacy of the Templars. They became the blank canvas upon which the world paints its obsession with secrets. In the 18th century, the Freemasons, seeking an ancient lineage to legitimise their lodges, reached back and claimed the Templars as their spiritual ancestors. They wove a narrative of survival, of secret knowledge passed from Grand Master to Grand Master in an unbroken chain of strict observance. Suddenly, the humble knights who couldn't read Latin were transformed into the custodians of the wisdom of Solomon, the architects of the pyramids, and the protectors of the bloodline of Christ. It was a rebranding so successful that today you cannot walk into a bookstore without seeing a thriller about a Templar conspiracy. From Ivanhoe, where Sir Walter Scott painted them as arrogant villains, to the modern Da Vinci codes that paint them as misunderstood heroes, they have become the universal symbol of the organisation, the power behind the throne, the men who know the truth. But why? Why do we still care about these medieval Frenchmen? Perhaps it is because they represent a lost ideal that we secretly crave. The unity of the spiritual and the martial. In a modern world that is fractured, bureaucratic, and often meaningless, the image of the Templar, disciplined, committed, willing to die for a cause greater than himself, resonates with a deep, nostalgic ache. They are the Jedi Knights of history, wielding swords of light against the darkness. We forgive them their flaws, their greed, and their pride, and we remember only the white mantle snapping in the wind and the charge at Ascalon. We want to believe that there is a secret, a treasure, a holy grail, because if there is, then the world is not random. It is a puzzle waiting to be solved. The Templars give us that puzzle. They are the ghosts in the machine of Western history. And so, the story that began with 9 poor knights in the dust of Jerusalem ends not in a fire in Paris, but in the quiet, endless corridor of our own curiosity. They have achieved the immortality they sought, not through the resurrection of the body, but through the resurrection of the story. They have become the guardians of the gate between what we know and what we dream. The sun has set on the temple, but the candle in the window has never gone out. The heavy iron gates of history are closing now, slowly, gently, shutting out the noise of the Crusades and the whispers of the kings. The fire on the Seine has faded into a soft, warm glow, like the embers in a hearth that keeps the cold night at bay. You have walked a long road tonight, from the blinding sun of the Holy Land to the cool mists of Scotland, through centuries of stone and silence. But that journey is over. The knights have laid down their swords. The scribes have put away their quills. The archives are sealed, and the secrets are safe in the dark. Let the tension of the story dissolve from your shoulders. There are no more battles to fight, no more mysteries to solve. You are safe here, in the quiet of your own time, in the comfort of your own space. The dust of the ages is settling, covering the past in a soft velvet blanket of peace. The voices of the monks are just a distant, soothing hum now, like the sound of the ocean at night. Let your breathing slow down, matching the rhythm of a world at rest. The history books are closed, the legends are sleeping, and now, so can you. Drift away on the river of time, safe, warm, and protected. Sweet dreams.